Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Samuel Stormwind, and I've spent the last 20 years patrolling the waters of Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska. Before that, I put in 15 years with the Coast Guard. In all that time on these dangerous waters, I thought I'd seen everything the sea could throw at me. I was wrong. People ask me why I became a park ranger after such a long career with the Coast Guard. The truth is, I left after witnessing something I couldn't explain, something that shook my faith in everything I thought I knew about the ocean. But that's another story. What I'm here to tell you about happened in March of 1979, during the worst winter storms we'd seen in decades. I live with my wife Sarah and our two teenage boys in a small house near Bartlett Cove. Sarah knows better than to ask too many questions about my work. She's seen the look in my eyes when I come home from certain patrols. She just makes sure there's hot coffee waiting and lets me talk when I'm ready. Glacier Bay is not like other places. It's wild in a way that makes you feel small and forgotten. The water is so deep in some spots that if you dropped a skyscraper into it, you'd never see the top. Massive glaciers tower over you like frozen mountains, creaking and groaning as they slowly crawl toward the sea. When chunks break off and crash into the water, it sounds like thunder that goes on forever. But it's Muir Inlet that will always stick in my memory. 65 miles northwest of our station, it's one of the most isolated spots in the park. The water there is over 1,200 feet deep, carved out by glaciers thousands of years ago. Most days, it's beautiful in a harsh, empty way. Some days, it's something else entirely. The Tlingit people who lived here before us had stories about these waters. They called them the hunting grounds of the phantom hunters, ghostly kayakers who appeared in the mist to guide lost souls to the other side. I used to smile when the old-timers told those stories. I was a man of facts, of radar and radio and navigation charts. Ghosts were for people who didn't understand how fog could play tricks on your eyes. My job was marine safety and search and rescue. In 20 years, I'd pulled more than 400 people out of situations that should have killed them. Fishermen who got caught in sudden storms. Tourists who didn't respect the power of the ice. Kayakers who thought they were tougher than 40-knot winds and 38-degree water. I was good at my job because I understood these waters. I could read the ice patterns and predict where the dangerous flows would be. I could look at the clouds and tell you if a storm was coming 3 hours before my instruments picked it up. I knew every inlet, every current, every hidden rock that could tear the bottom out of your boat. That winter had been brutal. Storm after storm rolled in from the Gulf of Alaska, bringing winds that could flip a boat like a toy. The ice was thick and unpredictable, shifting with the tides in ways that could trap you if you weren't careful. Most of the tourist boats had stopped running by February. Only the most experienced fishermen were still working, and even they stayed close to shore. It was March 15th when I got the call that changed everything. 3 kayakers had been caught in a sudden squall near Muir Inlet. They'd activated their emergency beacon, but by the time our patrol boat reached the coordinates, the storm had passed and they were nowhere to be found. We searched for 6 hours before we spotted them, huddled on a small rocky island about 2 miles from where they should have been. They were cold and scared, but alive. As we pulled them aboard, they kept talking about the ship that had helped them. "What ship?" I asked. I'd been monitoring all radio traffic. No other vessels had reported being in the area. "The old sailing ship," one of them said. "A young woman named Lisa. Her lips were blue from the atieu, cold, but her eyes were wide and alert. It appeared right when the storm hit worst, showed us the way to the island." Her boyfriend Mike nodded eagerly. It was like something from a museum. Tall masts, wooden hull. We could see the crew working on deck. The third kayaker, an older man named Pete, was quieter. But when I pressed him, he said the same thing. A large sailing vessel with wooden masts had guided them to safety, then disappeared when the storm cleared. I checked my radar logs when we got back to base. Nothing. No ship had been in that area except my patrol boat. But 3 people had seen the same thing. 3 people who had no reason to lie. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about their description of the ship: tall masts and wooden hull. In 1979, there weren't many vessels like that still sailing, especially not in Alaskan waters in March. And why hadn't they responded to radio calls? I started doing some research in the park's historical files. What I found made my hands shake as I turned the pages. The next morning brought another call. This time it was Captain Jensen, a commercial fisherman who'd been working these waters for 30 years. His voice was shaky over the radio. "Sam, I need to report something strange, real strange." I grabbed my notepad. Jensen wasn't the type to get rattled easily. "Go ahead, Captain." I was checking my nets about 5 miles northeast of Muir Inlet when I saw this ship. Big one, looked like one of those old whaling vessels. 3 masts, square-rigged. Thought maybe it was some kind of replica or tourist thing, but... He paused, and I could hear him take a deep breath. "But what, Captain?" It was there 1 minute, gone the next. Just vanished into thin air. "And Sam, I've been running sonar all morning. The fish are acting crazy down there. My equipment's picking up sounds like whale songs, but deeper, older. And there ain't supposed to be whales in this area this time of year." I told Jensen I'd check it out and signed off. 2 sightings in 2 days of ships that shouldn't exist. As a rational man, I tried to think of explanations. Maybe it was a research vessel that wasn't filing proper reports. Maybe the winter isolation was getting to people. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I took my patrol boat out that afternoon. The weather was clear, which was rare for March. The water was calm as glass, reflecting the towering ice walls of the inlet like a blue-black mirror. Perfect conditions for spotting anything unusual. I'd been patrolling for about 2 hours when my radar picked up a contact. Large vessel, about 3 miles ahead. I radioed the standard greeting. "Unknown vessel, this is Glacier Bay Marine Patrol. Please identify yourself." Static. I tried again, still nothing. I pushed the throttle forward, heading toward the contact. As I got closer, the radar signature became clearer. It was big, maybe 200 feet long, moving slowly against the current. But when I came around the point where I should have seen it, there was nothing there. Empty water stretching to the horizon. I checked my radar again. The contact was gone. I circled the area for an hour, using every trick I'd learned in 25 years of marine work. I checked for debris, for oil slicks, for any sign that a large vessel had been there. Nothing. That's when I noticed the temperature. The water where the radar contact had been was 15 degrees colder than the surrounding area. I checked 3 times to make sure. There was no current that could explain it, no underwater spring, just a pocket of freezing water in the middle of the inlet. As I turned to head back, something caught my eye floating near the ice wall. I maneuvered closer and used a boat hook to pull it aboard. It was a piece of wood. Old wood, weathered and gray, but carved with the kind of craftsmanship you don't see anymore, and burned into one side was a name, Arctic Star. That night, I went back to the historical files. It took me 3 hours to find it. Buried in records from 1895, the Arctic Star was part of a whaling fleet that had disappeared during a sudden storm in Muir Inlet. 5 ships, 93 men, lost without a trace. According to the records, they'd been hunting bowhead whales in violation of an agreement with the local Tlingit tribes. The natives had warned them that these particular whales were sacred, that hunting them would bring a curse. The whalers ignored the warning. The storm that sank them came out of nowhere. Winds over 70 knots, waves 30 feet high. When it cleared, there was no sign of any of the ships. Search parties found some debris but never recovered a single body. The records also mentioned that in the years following the disaster, local fishermen reported seeing phantom ships in the inlet, always during storms, always in the same area where the fleet was lost. I closed the file and rubbed my tired eyes. Ghost ships. I was actually considering ghost ships as a possible explanation. 20 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be reading about phantom vessels with a straight face, I'd have recommended they see a doctor. But the wood sitting on my desk was real. The cold water was real. The radar contacts were real. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I was starting to remember why I'd really left the Coast Guard. The next morning brought fog so thick you couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. I almost canceled my patrol, but something made me go out anyway. Maybe curiosity. Maybe stupidity. I was halfway to Muir Inlet when I heard it. Voices calling across the water, faint at first, almost lost in the sound of my engine. But as I slowed down to listen, they became clearer. Men calling to each other, orders being shouted, the creak of rope and wood. I cut my engine and drifted in the fog. The sounds were all around me now. Footsteps on wooden decks, the splash of oars. And underneath it all, a deep humming that seemed to come from the water itself. That's when the first ship appeared. It came out of the fog like something from another world. Tall masts pierced the gray mist, followed by the dark bulk of a wooden hull. It was huge, at least 200 feet long, with 3 square-rigged masts and a bow that cut through the water without making a sound. I fumbled for my radio, but my hands were shaking too badly to work the controls. The ship passed not 50 yards from my boat, close enough that I could see figures moving on the deck. Men in heavy coats and wool caps, working with harpoons and coils of rope. One of them looked directly at me. His face was pale, and his eyes were dark holes in his skull. He raised his hand in what might have been a greeting or a warning. Then the fog swirled, and the ship was gone. My radar showed nothing. I sat there for 10 minutes, trying to convince myself it had been a hallucination. Fog could play tricks. Isolation could make you see things. But the smell lingered in the air, whale oil and tar and something else. Something like old death. When I finally got my hands steady enough to start the engine, I headed straight back to base. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what was happening before I lost my mind completely. But the ships weren't done with me. Over the next week, I saw them 4 more times. Always in the fog, always in the same area of Muir Inlet. Sometimes it was just one vessel, sometimes 2 or 3. They appeared on my radar, just long enough for me to start toward them, then vanished when I got close. Other people were seeing them too. Captain Jensen reported another sighting. A group of researchers from the university called in about a historical vessel that disappeared before they could photograph it. Even some of the park's other rangers were asking questions about unusual activity in the inlet. I started avoiding the area, telling myself I was just being practical. The weather was getting worse, and there was no point risking lives chasing phantoms. But deep down, I knew I was scared. Then came the morning when everything changed. I was responding to a distress call from a small fishing boat that had broken down near the mouth of the inlet. Engine trouble, nothing serious. But as I was towing them back to safe harbor, the fog rolled in faster than I'd ever seen before. 1 minute we had clear visibility for miles. The next, we were wrapped in a gray blanket so thick it seemed solid. That's when my passenger, a young fisherman named Danny, grabbed my arm. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I listened. Through the fog came the sound of men singing. A work song, the kind sailors used to keep time while hauling nets or raising anchor. But the voices sounded hollow, like they were coming from far away or from underwater. Then we saw the lights. Lanterns moving through the fog, swinging with the rhythm of the song. They were all around us, dozens of them, forming a rough circle with my boat in the center. Danny was gripping my arm so hard it hurt. "What is that? What's happening?" I didn't answer because I was staring at my instruments. The water temperature had dropped 20 degrees. My compass was spinning like a toy. And on my radio, I was picking up voices speaking in old-fashioned language about whales and hunting and the cursed waters of the inlet. The lanterns moved closer. I could see the ships now, 5 of them, exactly like the records described. They surrounded us completely, their crews working on deck as if we weren't there. That's when one of them hailed us. "Ahoy there!" The voice came clearly across the water, accented in a way I'd only heard in old movies. "You sailing men, we have need of your assistance." I looked at Danny. His face was white as snow. "Are you going to answer them?" he asked. Before I could decide, a smaller boat emerged from the fog. It was rowing toward us, manned by figures I could barely make out in the gray light. As it got closer, I could see they were wearing the kind of heavy weather gear that had been popular a century ago. Oilskins and wool caps and thick boots. The man in the bow stood up as they pulled alongside. He was tall and bearded, with eyes that seemed to look right through me. "I am Captain Marcus Blackwood of the whaling ship Redemption," he said. "We have been hunting the great whale for many seasons now, but our crew grows thin. We have need of able seamen to complete our task. I found my voice, though it came out as a croak. Your hunting license, what year was it issued? He smiled, and his teeth were black stumps. Year? Time has no meaning in these waters, friend. There is only the hunt and the whale that must be taken. Danny was making a sound like a wounded animal. I put my hand on his shoulder to steady him, or maybe to steady myself. We're just passing through, I managed to say. We'll be leaving now. Captain Blackwood's smile faded. Leaving? But you have already joined us. The mist has claimed you, as it claimed us. There is no leaving now. I looked around. The fog had grown thicker, and the phantom ships were closing in. I could hear their crews calling to each other, preparing to board us. That's when I remembered what I'd learned about breaking curses. You're hunting the wrong whale, I said, my voice stronger now. The one you're after is already dead. Captain Blackwood's face twisted with anger. Impossible. We have tracked the great beast for 84 years. It swims these waters still, mocking us, keeping us from our eternal rest. I pulled out the historical records I'd been carrying in my boat. Look at this. March 1895. Your fleet was lost hunting bowhead whales in violation of Tlingit sacred law. The whales you were after went extinct in these waters 20 years ago. The phantom captain snatched the papers from my hands. As he read, his face grew even paler. Around us, the other ships had stopped moving. Their crews were gathering along the rails, listening to every word. This cannot be, Blackwood whispered. We must complete the hunt. We must take the whale or be forever cursed to sail these cursed waters. The curse isn't about taking the whale, I said, understanding flooding through me. It's about respecting what you tried to destroy. The Tlingit didn't curse you to hunt forever. They cursed you to understand what you had done. Danny was staring at me like I'd lost my mind, but I pressed on. I could feel the truth of it in my bones. You want to end this? You want to find peace? Then you need to ask forgiveness from the spirit of the whale you killed. Blackwood dropped the papers. Where do we find this? I pointed toward the deepest part of the inlet. Down there. Where your ships went down. Where the whales you killed still rest. The fog began to swirl around us, and I could feel the phantom boats moving. Not away, but toward the deep water. We were being carried along with them, my patrol boat, somehow part of their ghostly fleet. As we moved into the deepest part of the inlet, the water around us began to glow with a soft blue light. Danny gasped and pointed overboard. Far below us, shapes were moving in the depths, massive shapes that could only be whales. But these whales were made of light, swimming through water that looked more like stars than sea. And rising up from the bottom, I could see the wreckage of the 5 whaling ships, their masts reaching toward us like skeletal fingers. The spirits of our victims, Blackwood breathed. They have been waiting. The largest of the glowing whales rose toward us, growing bigger as it approached. It was ancient and wise, and when it broke the surface, it spoke without using words. Its voice filled our minds directly. Asterisk, why do you disturb our rest? Asterisk, it asked. Captain Blackwood fell to his knees in his small boat. Great Spirit, we come seeking forgiveness. For 84 years, we have hunted in these waters, trying to complete a task that brought only death and destruction. We understand now that we were wrong to ignore the warnings, wrong to kill your kind for nothing but oil and profit. The whale spirit regarded him with eyes like ancient stars. Asterisk. And what would you give for this forgiveness? Asterisk. Anything, Blackwood said. Our ships, our souls, our eternal service. Just let us rest. Asterisk. I do not want your service. Asterisk, the whale said. Asterisk, I want your understanding. For the rest of time, when ships sail these waters, you will protect them as you should have protected us. You will guide them to safety instead of leading them to destruction. Asterisk, Blackwood looked up, hope flickering in his dead eyes. We accept? The whale spirit turned its great head toward me. Asterisk, and you, guardian of these waters, you carry the blood of one who sailed with these men. Will you accept the responsibility that comes with that heritage? Asterisk, I thought of my wife and sons. Waiting at home, I thought of all the people who depended on me to keep these waters safe. What kind of responsibility? Asterisk, to watch the boundaries between what was and what is, to ensure that past mistakes do not repeat themselves. to guide both the living and the dead when they lose their way. I looked at Danny, who was staring at me with wide, frightened eyes. Then I looked at the Phantom captain, still kneeling in his boat. I accept, I said. The whale spirit smiled. If whales can smile. Then it began to sink back into the glowing depths, taking the light with it. The Phantom ships started to fade, their crews waving farewell as they finally sailed toward whatever lay beyond the fog. Captain Blackwood was the last to disappear. As his boat grew translucent, he called out to me, "Remember, Guardian, we will be watching. And when the living need guidance in these waters, we will answer." Then they were gone, and Danny and I were alone in normal fog with normal water beneath us. But I could feel something different in the air, a sense of presence, of protection. The inlet no longer felt empty and hostile, it felt watched over. We made it back to base without any more incidents, though Danny didn't speak for the entire trip. When we docked, he looked at me with a mixture of fear and respect. "What just happened out there?" he asked. "Something that needed to happen a long time ago," I told him. "And Danny? This stays between us, understand? People wouldn't believe it anyway." He nodded and walked away quickly, but I could tell he'd never forget what he'd seen. I filed my report that night, listing the incident as successful rescue operation in heavy fog conditions. It wasn't exactly lying. We had been rescued, in a way. In the days that followed, things changed in Muir Inlet. The mysterious radar contacts stopped appearing. The cold spots in the water disappeared. Captain Jensen reported that the fish were behaving normally again. But I noticed other changes too. Ships in trouble started reporting seeing helpful lights in the fog, guiding them to safety. Lost kayakers found themselves being led toward shore by currents that shouldn't have existed. The inlet that had always been one of the most dangerous areas in the park suddenly had the lowest accident rate on record. I started keeping careful track of these incidents. Every time someone was helped by unknown forces, I marked it on my charts. The pattern was clear. The Phantom Fleet was keeping their promise, protecting travelers instead of hunting them. My wife Sarah noticed the change in me too. I was calmer, more purposeful in my work. I started studying Tlingit folklore and learning to read the old signs that my ancestor might have known. I found myself able to predict weather patterns that my instruments couldn't detect, to sense when someone was in trouble before they called for help. A year later, I was promoted to Chief of Marine Operations for the entire park. My superiors said I had developed an almost supernatural ability to prevent accidents and find lost people. If only they knew how right they were. I still patrol Muir Inlet regularly. Sometimes, when the fog is thick and the water is calm, I catch glimpses of tall masts in the distance. But they're not threatening anymore, they're just there, watching, protecting. The tourists and fishermen who frequent these waters don't know about the guardian spirits that watch over them. They don't need to know. They just need to be safe, and they are. But sometimes, when I'm training new rangers or talking to groups of visitors, I make sure to mention the importance of respecting these waters, of understanding that the sea holds memories as well as life, of listening to the warnings that native peoples have passed down for generations, because some waters hold more than they appear, and some ships sail forever, not because they're cursed, but because they've chosen to serve something greater than themselves. The phantom ships of Glacier Bay still sail these waters, but now, instead of hunting, they guide. Instead of taking life, they preserve it. And as long as I'm able to patrol these waters, I'll make sure their sacrifice is remembered and their vigil honored. That's my promise to the whale spirit that gave them, and me, a second chance. And it's a promise I intend to keep for as long as these waters will have me. My name is Rebecca Nighthawk, and I've been a park ranger in Alaska for 17 years. Before that, I spent 20 years climbing mountains all over the world. I've seen avalanches bury entire camps, watched frostbite turn fingers black, and pulled more dead bodies off peaks than I care to count. I always thought I understood how mountains kill people. I was wrong. People call me when things go bad in the high country. Really bad. When other rescue teams won't go up because the conditions are too dangerous, they call me. I've climbed every major peak in Alaska, some of them more times than I can remember. Mount McKinley, Mount Foraker, Mount Hunter, I know them like old friends. Or at least, I thought I did. The thing about being a mountain rescue ranger is that you see patterns. Climbers die in predictable ways. They fall because they're tired. They freeze because a storm catches them. They get altitude sickness because they climb too fast. There's always a reason that makes sense. Physics and weather and human error. That's what kills people in the mountains. I live in a small cabin near the Chisana River, right at the edge of Wrangell Street Elias National Park. It's the biggest national park in America, and most people have never heard of it. That's fine by me. The fewer tourists we get, the fewer rescues I have to do. But even the experienced climbers who come here sometimes don't make it home. My hands are covered in scars from frostbite and rope burns. My left shoulder pops every morning because I dislocated it, pulling a guy out of a crevasse 3 years ago. This job has beaten up my body, but I wouldn't do anything else. After what happened to David, I couldn't do anything else. David was my climbing partner. More than that, we were engaged. We'd been planning to get married after one last big climb together. Mount Blackburn in July of 1985, 16,390 feet of glaciated rock and ice. We'd climbed harder peaks. But David wanted to do this one because his grandfather had tried it back in the 30s and never made it to the top. The weather turned bad on our third day. Winds hit 60 miles per hour out of nowhere. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in 2 hours. David was ahead of me on the rope when the storm hit. I heard him yell something, but the wind was too loud. When I got to where he should have been, the rope just ended. Cut clean through, like someone had taken a knife to it. They never found his body. I spent 6 days searching every crevasse, every cliff face, every place he could have fallen. Nothing. The official report said he fell, and his body was buried by an avalanche triggered by the storm. I believed that for a long time. It was easier than believing anything else. That's why I became a ranger. If I couldn't save David, maybe I could save other people. Maybe I could keep other families from going through what his family went through. What I went through. I've been good at my job. 85 successful rescues in 17 years. I know the mountains. I know how they behave, how they kill, how to read the weather and the snow and the ice. I can predict an avalanche by the sound the snow makes under my feet. I can tell you if a route is safe just by looking at it through binoculars. At least, I thought I could. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in July. 3 climbers overdue on Mount Blackburn. They'd been gone for 5 days with supplies for 3. Their base camp manager hadn't heard from them since day 2. Standard rescue protocol. Take a partner, check their last known position, look for signs of what went wrong. My partner that day was Tom Reeves, a good climber but still pretty new to rescue work. We loaded up our gear and flew in by helicopter as close to their planned route as we could get. The pilot said he'd pick us up in 12 hours unless we radioed for an extension. We started hiking before the sun came up. Their route took them up the south face of Blackburn, the same general area where David had died. I hadn't been back there since that day. The closer we got to the climbing route, the more familiar everything looked. The same rock formations, the same glacial valleys, the same view of the peaks stretching out forever. That's when we heard the first scream. It came from high up on the mountain, maybe 18,000 feet, way higher than anyone should be able to survive for long. It sounded like a person in terrible pain, echoing off the rock walls and ice fields. The sound went on for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. "What was that?" Tom asked. He was scanning the upper reaches of the mountain with his binoculars. "Probably wind," I said. But I'd heard wind in these mountains for 20 years, and that didn't sound like wind. We found their first camp without any trouble. 3 sleeping bags, still laid out, food scattered around like they'd left in a hurry. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no indication of what had scared them away from their gear. Their climbing ropes were still there, along with most of their technical equipment. They wouldn't leave all this gear unless something was really wrong, Tom said. He was right. Climbers don't abandon expensive equipment unless they're running for their lives. But running from what? We followed their route up the mountain. At first, the tracks were normal, boot prints in the snow, crampon marks on the ice. But as we got higher, things started looking strange. The tracks seemed to lead up rock faces, that should have been impossible to climb without ropes. We found crampon marks on vertical granite walls, 30 feet up from any ledge or crack that could hold a person's weight. How did they get up there? Tom kept asking. I didn't have an answer. I'd been climbing for 20 years, and I'd never seen anything like it. People don't climb smooth vertical rock without protection. It's not just difficult, it's physically impossible. Then we heard the screaming again. This time it was closer, and there were multiple voices. Men shouting words I couldn't understand, but the terror in their voices was clear. The sounds were coming from directly above us, from a cliff face that overhung so much it was basically a ceiling of rock. There's nobody up there, Tom said, staring through his binoculars. I can see the whole face, it's empty. But the screaming continued. Human voices, definitely human, coming from a place where no human could possibly be. As we listened, the voices seemed to move, starting from one part of the cliff face and traveling along it like people were traversing an invisible route through the air. My radio crackled to life. Static, mostly, but underneath it I could hear something that made my blood freeze. Voices. Faint, but definitely voices. One of them sounded like David, Rebecca. The voice was barely audible through the static. Rebecca, come up, come find me. I yanked the radio away from my ear like it had burned me. Tom was staring at me with wide eyes. What was that? He asked. Nothing, I said quickly. Radio interference. The altitude messes with the equipment sometimes. But my hands were shaking as I clipped the radio back to my belt. I'd heard David's voice. I was sure of it. But David had been dead for 2 years. We kept climbing. The higher we got, the more wrong everything felt. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, no wind, comfortable temperature. But every instinct I'd developed over 20 years of climbing was screaming at me to turn around and get off the mountain immediately. The crampon marks kept appearing in impossible places. We found a climbing harness hanging from a rock outcrop 60 feet up a smooth wall. No rope, no anchor points, nothing that could have held a person's weight. Just the harness, swaying gently in a breeze that I couldn't feel. Maybe they fell, Tom suggested. Maybe the gear got caught on the way down. Then where are the bodies? I asked. He didn't have an answer for that either. As we approached the area where the missing climbers should have made their high camp, the screaming got louder, not just louder, clearer. I could make out individual words now, though they were in a language I didn't recognize. The voices sounded like they were in terrible pain, or terrible fear, or both. Tom stopped climbing and pressed himself against the rock wall. I can't do this, he said. Something's really wrong here. We should call for backup. I wanted to agree with him. Everything in my experience as a climber and a rescuer was telling me to retreat. But those missing climbers were up there somewhere. And if David's voice was coming through my radio, then maybe. We have a job to do, I said. 3 people are missing. We don't leave without them. Tom looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded and kept climbing. We were good rangers. We didn't abandon people. As we crested a ridge that would give us a view of the upper mountain, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. There were people climbing on the vertical rock faces above us. Not 1 or 2, dozens of them. They moved across the impossible terrain like spiders, their movements too fluid and fast to be human. As I watched, one of them let go of the rock completely and fell upward, disappearing into the overcast sky above the peaks. Do you see that? I whispered to Tom. He was staring in the same direction, his face pale. There's nobody there, he said. The rock face is empty. But I could see them clearly. Climbers in old-fashioned gear, moving through the air itself, their screams echoing across the mountain. And at the front of the group, leading them up an invisible route through the sky, was a figure I recognized. David. It was definitely David. He turned and looked down at me, and even from 1,000 feet away, I could see his smile. Tom couldn't see them, but I could. The ghost climbers moved across the impossible rock faces like they were walking on level ground. Their ropes and gear looked old, from different decades, different eras of mountaineering. Some wore modern synthetic clothing, others had canvas and wool that looked like it came from the early 1900s. We need to get out of here, Tom said again. His voice was tight with fear. This place feels cursed. I wanted to leave, Every rational part of my mind was screaming at me to turn around and get off the mountain, but David was up there. I could see him clearly now, climbing routes that defied everything I knew about physics and gravity. We found the missing climbers' high camp an hour later. Their tent was set up on a narrow ledge, but when we got close enough to look inside, it was empty. No sleeping bags, no people, no sign of what had happened to. But their gear was arranged in a perfect circle around the tent, like someone had been performing some kind of ritual. In the center of the circle, scratched into the rock, was a message. They called us to climb higher. "What does that mean?" Tom asked. Before I could answer, my radio erupted with voices. Not static this time. Clear human speech. Multiple people talking at once, all of them excited, all of them describing incredible climbing routes. The rock face is like glass, but our hands stick to it perfectly. I can see handholds that aren't there, but they hold my weight. The summit is beautiful. You can climb forever here. And underneath all the other voices, I heard David again. "Rebecca, you have to come up. You have to see this. We can climb together again." Tom was staring at the radio like it had grown teeth. Those voices. Some of them matched the descriptions of the missing climbers. He was right. I recognized the voice of Jake Morrison, the lead climber of the missing team. He was talking about routes and conditions that sounded impossible, but he sounded happier than anyone I'd ever heard. "Rebecca?" David's voice came through clearly now. "Remember our plan to climb the perfect route? This is it. This is the mountain we were looking for. Come up. Come, join us." I looked up at the impossible cliff faces above us, where the ghost climbers continued their eternal ascent. David was still visible, still smiling down at me. Part of me wanted to join him more than I'd ever wanted anything. "We have to go down," Tom said. "Whatever's happening here, it's not something we can fight with ropes and ice axes." But as he spoke, the weather began to change. Clouds appeared out of nowhere, rolling down from the peaks like a gray avalanche. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in minutes. Wind started howling through the rock formations, and in that wind, I could hear more voices. Hundreds of them, all of them calling out descriptions of perfect climbing conditions, just a little higher up the mountain. "The storm came out of nowhere," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew it wasn't a natural storm. The clouds were moving wrong, flowing upward instead of down. The wind was blowing in patterns that made no sense. Tom tried to radio for helicopter evacuation, but all we got was more voices. Climbers from different decades, all of them describing the incredible routes they'd found above the normal limits of human endurance. They sounded like they'd found paradise. This is what happened to the missing team, I realized. They heard the voices. They followed them up. "Followed them where?" Tom asked. "There's nowhere to go. Those cliff faces are unclimbable." But as I watched the ghost climbers above us, I was starting to understand. They weren't climbing on rock anymore. They were climbing on air itself, following routes that existed in some other dimension, some parallel version of the mountain where the laws of physics work differently. "The mountain is alive," I said. It sounded insane, but it was the only explanation that made sense. "It's calling climbers to join it." The storm was getting worse. Snow began falling upward, creating a confusing whirlwind of white that made it impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. The ghost voices got louder, more insistent. I could hear David calling my name over and over. Tom grabbed my arm. "We have to find shelter. This storm will kill us." We started looking for a place to wait out the weather, but every cave and overhang we found was already occupied. Not by living people, by the ghosts of dead climbers. They sat in the sheltered spots, their gear spread out around them, talking excitedly about the routes they were planning for tomorrow. Most of them looked like they'd been dead for years, but they acted like they were still alive, still climbing. "Can you see them now?" I asked Tom. He shook his head, but I could tell he felt something. His eyes kept darting to empty spaces where I could see the ghost climbers clearly. He could sense them even if he couldn't see them. We finally found an empty ledge big enough for our emergency bivouac. As we set up the shelter, I could hear more voices on the radio. The missing climbers were still talking, still describing the amazing routes they'd found, but something in their voices had changed. They sounded distant, like they were forgetting their old lives, forgetting why they'd come to the mountain in the first place. "How long have we been climbing?" Jake Morrison's voice asked through the static. "Does it matter?" Another voice answered. "Every route here is perfect. Every handhold is exactly where you need it." "I had a wife," Jake said, and there was confusion in his voice. "Didn't I have a wife?" "The mountain is your family now," David's voice cut in. "All of us are family here. We climb forever." I understood then what the mountain was doing. It wasn't just killing climbers, it was collecting them, turning them into part of itself, making them forget their old lives and focus only on the perfect climbing it offered. They were happy, these ghost climbers, but they weren't human anymore. As the night wore on, the voices got closer. I could see the ghost climbers moving toward our position, following routes that led directly through solid rock. They were curious about the living climbers on their mountain, curious about potential new recruits. "Join us," they called out through the storm. "The climbing here is perfect. No fear, no falling, no limits." Tom couldn't see them, but he could hear the voices now. They were getting too strong to ignore. "What do they want?" he asked. "They want us to climb with them," I said. "Forever." David appeared at the edge of our ledge, as solid-looking as a living person. He smiled at me, the same way he had the morning we'd started our last climb together. "I've been waiting for you," he said. "I knew you'd come back to the mountain eventually. I knew you'd want to finish our climb." I wanted to reach out and touch him, to make sure he was real. 2 years of grief and guilt and loneliness had left a hole in my heart that felt like it might never heal. Here was my chance to be with him again, to climb together like we'd always planned. But I looked at Tom, shivering in his sleeping bag, trusting me to get him home safely. I thought about all the families waiting for news about their missing loved ones. I thought about my duty as a ranger. "I can't," I told David. "I have responsibilities." His smile faded. "The mountain doesn't like it when people refuse its invitation," he said. "It gets insistent." The storm immediately got worse. The ghost climbers surrounded our ledge. I could see dozens of them now, from every era of mountaineering. They stood on impossible handholds, hung from ropes that were anchored to nothing, defied gravity with every movement. Their faces showed the same expression, the peaceful happiness of people who had found exactly what they were looking for. "Look how perfect this is," David said, gesturing to the supernatural climbing routes that crisscross the sky above us. "No weather can stop us. No fatigue slows us down. We can attempt routes that would be impossible for living climbers." Tom was pressed against the back wall of our tiny ledge, staring at empty air that I knew was filled with ghost climbers. He couldn't see them, but he could feel their presence. The temperature around us kept dropping, even though we were sheltered from the storm. "Why can't he see them?" I asked David. "The mountain chooses who can see us," David explained. "Usually it's people who are ready to join us, people who love climbing more than anything else in life." That hit me like a punch to the stomach. Of course I could see them. I'd spent my entire adult life on mountains. I'd chosen climbing over safety, over comfort, over normal relationships. Even after David died, I'd stayed close to the peaks, working as a ranger instead of finding a safe job in town. "The missing climbers," I said. "Where are they?" David pointed up at the impossible routes above us. 3 figures were moving across the sky, following handholds that only they could see. They climbed with the fluid grace of the other ghost climbers, their movements too smooth and confident to be entirely human. "They joined us on their second day," David said. "They heard us calling and realized what we were offering, perfect climbing, forever." "But they're dead," I said. "Are they?" David asked. "They're still climbing. They're happier than they ever were in life. Death is just a transition here. The mountain makes sure we can keep doing what we love." I watched the 3 missing climbers as they traversed a section of sky that should have been empty air. They looked content, focused entirely on the technical challenges of their route. But something about their movements looked wrong. Too repetitive, like they were climbing the same sequence of moves over and over again. "Are they climbing the same route, repeatedly?" I asked. David's smile flickered for just a moment. "The perfect route never gets old," he said. "Every time feels like the first time." But I could see the truth in his eyes. The ghost climbers weren't exploring new routes. They were trapped in an endless loop, reliving the same perfect moments for eternity. They thought they were happy because the mountain made them forget everything else. "I won't join you," I said firmly. "And I'm taking Tom back down." The wind immediately picked up, howling through the rock formations with a sound like screaming voices. The ghost climbers moved closer, no longer looking friendly. Their eyes had the flat, predatory look of hunters who had spotted prey. "The mountain doesn't like to be refused," David said again. His voice sounded different now, less like the man I'd loved and more like an echo of him. "It's been very patient with you, Rebecca. It let you work as a ranger all these years, hoping you'd eventually choose to join us willingly. But patience has limits." The storm around us began to change. Instead of random wind and snow, it started forming patterns. Handholds appeared in the swirling snow, visible routes leading up into the supernatural climbing area. The mountain was showing me exactly how to reach David and the other climbers. "Just follow the holds," David said. "It's easier than any route you've ever climbed. The mountain will help you." Tom grabbed my arm. "Don't listen to him," he said. "I don't know what I'm not seeing, but I know this whole place is wrong. We have to get out of here." He was right, but the storm was getting worse every second. Snow was stuff, falling horizontally now, driven by winds that seemed to blow from every direction at once. Our small ledge was becoming an island in a sea of supernatural weather. "You can't climb down in this," David pointed out. "The storm will last until you agree to join us. The mountain is very determined." I looked at Tom, then at the impossible routes leading up into the sky where the ghost climbers waited. I thought about the families of the missing climbers, who would never get closure if I didn't make it back to report what had really happened. I thought about all the other climbers who would come to this mountain in the future, drawn by the same voices that had called to the ghosts. "There has to be another way," I said. "There is," David said. "But you won't like it." He gestured to the ghost climbers surrounding us. "Every person here came to the mountain willingly. The mountain only takes people who choose to climb beyond human limits. But if someone were to discourage other climbers from coming here, the mountain might be willing to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "Become a guardian," David said. "Stay human, but help protect the mountain's interests. Keep other climbers away from the supernatural routes. Guide them to safer paths. In exchange, the mountain will let you visit us whenever you want." It wasn't the reunion I'd dreamed of, but it was better than joining the endless loop of ghost climbing or abandoning my duty to help other people. "What about Tom?" I asked. "He goes home," David said. "The mountain has no interest in him. He doesn't love climbing enough to be worth collecting." I looked up at the impossible routes where the missing climbers continued their eternal ascent. They looked happy, but they were trapped. They'd given up their humanity for perfect climbing conditions that weren't actually perfect, just endlessly repetitive. "I'll do it," I said, "but I want to talk to the missing climbers. First, I want to make sure they really chose this." David nodded and called out in a language I didn't recognize. The three newest ghost climbers descended from their route, moving through the air like they were rappelling down invisible ropes. When they reached our ledge, I could see that their eyes had the same flat, distant look as the other ghosts. They recognized me as a ranger, but they seemed confused about why that might be important. "Are you happy here?" I asked Jake Morrison. "Happy?" He seemed puzzled by the question. "The climbing is perfect. Every route is exactly the right difficulty. Every handhold is exactly where it should be. Do you remember your wife?" He frowned, struggling to access memories that the mountain was helping him forget. There was someone. But climbing is more important. Climbing is everything. That decided it for me. These people hadn't made an informed choice. They'd been seduced and then mentally altered by something that fed on their passion for climbing. I couldn't save them, but I could prevent the same thing from happening to other people. "I accept your deal," I told David. The storm stopped immediately. The helicopter picked us up 12 hours later. Tom and I both survived with only minor frostbite, though Tom never really talked about what happened on the mountain. He transferred to a different park 6 months later, said Alaska was too wild for him. I filed my official report as a climbing accident. 3 experienced mountaineers caught in a sudden storm, bodies lost in avalanche conditions that made recovery impossible. The standard story that families hate to hear but have to accept when climbing goes wrong. But I also put in a recommendation to close the upper routes on Mount Blackburn indefinitely. I cited unstable weather patterns, increased avalanche danger, and technical challenges beyond the skill level of most climbers. The Park Service approved it, without question. They trusted my judgment about mountain safety. That was 8 months ago. Since then, I've guided dozens of climbing parties away from the supernatural routes, always finding good reasons why they should try different peaks instead. The weather looks questionable, I tell them. The rock conditions aren't right. There are better routes on safer mountains. Most climbers listen to me. I have a reputation for keeping people safe, so they trust my advice. But sometimes I meet climbers who remind me of myself at that age. So hungry for the perfect route that they'll ignore warnings, so confident in their abilities that they think they can handle anything. Those are the ones I have to watch carefully. I can still see the ghost climbers when I look up at Mount Blackburn. They're always there, moving across the impossible routes, trapped in their endless pursuit of perfect climbing conditions. David visits me sometimes, appearing at my cabin when the moon is dark. He tells me about the new routes the mountain has created, tries to convince me that I'm missing out on the adventure of multiple lifetimes. You could climb forever, he says. No aging, no fatigue, no fear of falling, just pure climbing, the way it was meant to be. I always tell him the same thing. Someone has to protect the living. The hardest part is knowing that I can't save everyone. Last month, a solo climber ignored my warnings and headed up to the supernatural routes anyway. I found his gear arranged in a perfect circle 3 days later. That night, I saw a new figure among the ghost climbers, moving with the same fluid grace as the others. The mountain is patient, but it never stops calling. And there are always climbers willing to answer. I've started keeping a journal of everyone who comes through asking about Mount Blackburn. Most of them I can redirect to safer peaks, but some are too determined, too skilled, too hungry for the ultimate climbing experience. Those names go on a special list, and I check on them regularly. When they don't come back, I know the mountain has claimed another soul. The Park Service thinks I'm just being extra cautious after losing 3 climbers. They don't question my route closures or my conservative recommendations. They see it as trauma response, a ranger who's become overprotective after a bad rescue mission. If they only knew what I'm really protecting people from. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. The ghost climbers look happy, even if their happiness is artificial. They've found a kind of immortality doing what they loved most. Maybe that's not such a terrible fate. But then I think about the families waiting for their loved ones to come home. I think about the children who will grow up without parents, who chose perfect climbing over imperfect life. I think about Tom, who trusted me to get him home safely and probably still has nightmares about our night on the mountain. The mountain keeps its bargain. I can see David whenever I want, and the ghost climbers don't try to recruit me anymore. But the price is constant vigilance. Every climber who comes through, I have to evaluate. Are they skilled enough to be tempted by impossible routes? Are they passionate enough about climbing to risk everything for the perfect ascent? Because the mountain is still there, still calling, still offering perfect climbing conditions to anyone willing to pay the price of their humanity. And there will always be climbers who think that's a fair trade. My name is Rebecca Nighthawk, and I've been a park ranger in Alaska for 17 years. I've saved 86 people from the mountains, and I've lost count of how many I've saved from something much worse. The job gets harder every year, but I can't retire. The mountain won't let me, and deep down, I don't want to, because every time I guide a climbing party away from Mount Blackburn, every time I convince someone to choose a safer route, I'm keeping them human. I'm making sure they go home to their families instead of joining the endless ascent of the ghost climbers. It's not the life I planned, but it's the life the mountain chose for me. And sometimes, on clear nights when the moon is dark and the peaks are outlined against the stars, I can hear David's voice on the wind, telling me about the incredible routes I'm missing. But I stay on the ground, and I keep people safe. And I remember that some summits are meant for souls, not bodies. The mountain is patient. It has all the time in the world. But so do I. My name is Daniel Northstar, and I used to think I understood the aurora. For 13 years, I've worked as a ranger for the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Before that, I spent 10 years in labs and classrooms, getting my PhD in atmospheric physics from MIT. I published 15 papers on how the northern lights work. I thought I had it all figured out. Solar particles hitting our magnetic field, creating those dancing curtains of light across the Arctic sky. I was wrong about everything. It's February 1982, and I'm sitting in the tiny research station near Kaktovik, Alaska, 300 miles from the nearest real town. Outside, it's 40 below zero, with winds that could knock you flat. The sun hasn't shown its face for months up here. Perfect conditions for watching the aurora, which is why they sent me. The station got some weird reports. Aurora behaving strangely, moving in ways that didn't match any solar activity. The brass wanted someone with real experience. To check it out, take some readings, maybe get some photos. Routine stuff. My equipment is spread across the metal table. Magnetometers, spectroscopes, cameras loaded with special film. All the tools I need to measure electromagnetic fields and capture whatever's happening up there. The radio crackles with static every few minutes, but mostly it's quiet. Just me, the howling wind, and the endless night. I divorced 3 years ago. My ex-wife said I loved the aurora more than I loved her. Maybe she was right. After the split, Sarah took our daughter Emma back to the lower 48. Emma's 12 now. I haven't seen her since Christmas. The job keeps me busy, keeps my mind off things I can't change. Out here, 300 miles from anywhere, there's just the work. The pure science of it. No complications, no emotions, just data and measurement and the simple beauty of natural phenomena. At least, that's what I told myself. I'm checking my instruments when the first display starts. Through the small window, I can see the familiar green glow beginning to dance across the sky. Nothing unusual at first, just the normal interaction between solar wind and our magnetic field, exactly like I've seen thousands of times before. But then something feels wrong. The light isn't moving randomly like it should, it's moving in a pattern, like it has a purpose. I grab my camera and head outside. The cold hits me like a slap, even through my heavy jacket and boots. My breath comes out in white clouds that freeze before they can drift away. The snow crunches under my feet with that special sound it only makes when it's really, really cold. Above me, the aurora spreads across the entire sky. Green and purple ribbons of light, dancing and weaving, beautiful and familiar. But as I watch, I notice something that makes my scientist brain start asking uncomfortable questions. The light is moving toward me. Not drifting or flowing like normal. Aurora, moving. Like it sees me standing here and wants to get closer. I shake my head and start taking pictures. Solar particles don't see anything. They don't want anything. They're just charged particles following magnetic field lines. Basic physics. But the feeling of being watched won't go away. The electromagnetic readings on my instruments are going crazy. Numbers that don't make sense. The magnetometer is showing field strengths that should be impossible this far from the magnetic pole. My radio starts picking up strange signals, not quite static, not quite voices. I'm a scientist. I believe in data, in measurement, in things that can be tested and proven. But standing out here in the Arctic night, watching light that seems to watch me back, I start to understand why the Inupiat people have so many stories about the aurora. Why they call them the spirits of hunters who dance across the sky. The display lasts for 3 hours. I take over 200 photographs and fill 6 pages with instrument readings. When it finally fades, I go back inside to warm up and make sense of the data. Nothing makes sense. The magnetic field readings suggest there was something up there with the mass and electromagnetic signature of a small aircraft. But aircraft don't glow with aurora light, they don't move in perfect silence. And they definitely don't seem to respond when you point a camera at them. I radio back to headquarters. Give them the basic facts. Unusual electromagnetic activity, stronger than normal displays, some interesting readings that need analysis. I don't mention the feeling of being watched. Scientists don't include feelings in their reports. But as I settle in for the night, checking my equipment and reviewing the data, I can't shake the memory of those lights moving toward me. Almost like they were curious. Almost like they were hunting. Outside, the wind keeps howling, and somewhere in that sound, I think I hear something else. Something that might be voices. The next night, I'm not alone. Sarah Bennett arrived this morning on the supply flight, another atmospheric physicist, sent from the university to help with the investigation. She's younger than me, maybe 30, with the kind of enthusiasm I remember having before I learned to be disappointed by the gap between theory and reality. The readings you transmitted are impossible, she says, setting up her own equipment. Magnetic field fluctuations of that magnitude should have knocked out every piece of electronic equipment for 50 miles. I know, I tell her. I've been doing this for over a decade. I've never seen anything like it. She's brought newer instruments, digital readouts that can measure electromagnetic fields with much more precision than my analog equipment. If something strange is happening up there, we'll be able to document it properly. The aurora starts earlier tonight, around 9 p.m. At first, it looks normal, the familiar green curtains dancing across the northern horizon. Sarah is excited, taking readings and photographs, making notes about everything she observes. Look at these numbers, she says, pointing to her magnetometer. The field strength is increasing in regular pulses, almost like a heartbeat. I check my own instruments. She's right. Whatever's causing the aurora display is generating electromagnetic pulses at regular intervals. 60 beats per minute. Exactly like a human heart rate. That has to be a coincidence, Sarah says, but her voice sounds uncertain. Above us, the lights are getting brighter, and they're moving in that same purposeful way I noticed last night. Not the random dance of charged particles, but coordinated movement, like a formation. Daniel, Sarah whispers, grabbing my arm, look at Sector 7. I turn my binoculars toward the section of sky she's indicating. What I see makes my blood turn cold. The aurora. Lights are arranged in the shape of running figures. Not vague shapes that might look like people if you squint and use your imagination. Actual human forms, running across the sky in perfect formation. 8 or 9 figures, moving together like a hunting party. Are you getting this on film? I ask. Sarah nods, but her hands are shaking as she adjusts her camera. The electromagnetic readings are off the charts. Whatever's creating this display is generating more energy than a solar flare. The figures in the sky start moving faster. Still in formation, but now they're moving toward our location. As they get closer, I can make out more details. They look like people wearing heavy winter clothing. People carrying what might be weapons. My radio crackles to life. Through the static, I hear something that sounds almost like words. Almost like voices calling to each other across vast distances. Did you hear that? Sarah asks. Before I can answer, the aurora lights suddenly intensify. The green glow becomes so bright it hurts to look at directly. The electromagnetic pulse increases to over 100 beats per minute, and the voices on the radio become clearer. They're speaking in what sounds like Inupiat. The hunting formation in the sky spreads out, surrounding our position. The figures move with purpose and intelligence, communicating with each other through the radio static. I've studied electromagnetic phenomena for 20 years, but nothing in my education prepared me for this. We need to get inside, I tell Sarah. But as we gather our equipment, one of the aurora figures breaks away from the formation and descends toward us, not fading or dispersing like normal aurora do when the energy decreases. Actually moving down, getting closer, becoming more solid-looking. The electromagnetic readings spike so high that Sarah's digital equipment starts sparking. My analog instruments are pegged at their maximum readings. The air around us fills with static electricity, making our hair stand up and our skin tingle. The aurora figure lands in the snow 20 feet away from us. It looks like a person, tall, wearing traditional Arctic hunting clothes, carrying what appears to be a harpoon that glows with the same green light as the aurora. But I can see through it, like looking at someone through green-tinted glass. And its eyes are pure light, no pupils or iris, just glowing electromagnetic energy. Sarah drops her camera and runs for the station. I should follow her, but I can't move. I'm staring at something that violates everything I know about physics, about reality, about what's possible in our universe. The figure raises its harpoon and points it at me. The weapon pulses with energy, and suddenly my radio comes alive with a clear transmission. Join the hunt, Skywatcher. The aurora calls to those who understand. The voice is speaking English now, but with an accent I don't recognize. Not Inupiat, not any human language I've ever heard. What are you? I manage to ask. We are the hunters between worlds. We follow the magnetic paths between stars. Your people call us Aurora, but we are alive, we are free, and we are hungry for new hunting grounds. Behind the figure, The other Aurora hunters are descending, taking solid form in the snow around our station. They move with the fluid grace of people who have spent their lives stalking prey across impossible terrain. I back toward the station door, but the lead hunter raises its hand, and I find I can't move. The electromagnetic field around it is so strong that it's affecting my nervous system, paralyzing my muscles. Your companion runs, the hunter says, but there is nowhere to hide from the lights of the sky. Through the window of the station, I can see Sarah frantically trying to radio for help. But our location is 300 miles from anywhere. And even if someone could reach us, what would we tell them? That the northern lights have come down to hunt us? The Aurora hunter steps closer, and I can feel the electromagnetic energy radiating from its form. It's like standing next to a massive power generator, but the energy isn't random. It's controlled, focused, intelligent. You study us, it says. You measure our movements, photograph our dances, but you do not understand what you observe. Help me understand, I say, hoping that my scientific curiosity might buy Sarah some time. The hunter tilts its head, considering my request. Around us, the other Aurora figures spread out, surrounding the station completely. They move without sound, their feet not quite touching the snow. We are old, the hunter explains. Older than your sun. We travel the magnetic currents between stars, following the solar winds to new worlds. Some worlds have good hunting, others. It gestures toward the station, toward Sarah inside. Others have prey that does not yet know it is prey. The Aurora hunter reaches out and touches my forehead with one glowing finger. Suddenly, I'm not standing in the snow anymore. I'm flying through space, following streams of magnetic energy between distant stars. I see worlds I don't recognize, alien landscapes lit by aurora displays. And on each world, I see the hunters. They're not all human-shaped. On some planets, they look like the dominant life forms of that world. But they all share the same electromagnetic nature, the same glowing energy, the same predatory intelligence. We are not confined to one form, the hunter explains, its voice now speaking directly inside my mind. We adapt. We become what we need to become to hunt effectively. The vision shifts, and I see Earth as the Aurora hunters first discovered it. Thousands of years ago, when early humans looked up at the northern lights and told stories about spirits in the sky, the hunters have been watching us ever since, learning about us, waiting for the right moment to begin the hunt. But why now, I ask? Your people have grown interesting. You build machines that generate electromagnetic fields. You send signals into space. You are becoming worthy prey. The vision ends, and I'm back in the snow, surrounded by glowing hunters. Through the station window, I can see Sarah still trying to get a radio signal out. But every piece of electronic equipment is dead, overwhelmed by the electromagnetic field the Aurora hunters generate. One of the hunters glides toward the station. It passes through the metal wall like it's not even there, and I hear Sarah scream. I try to run to help her, but the lead hunter grabs my arm. Its touch is like being struck by lightning, but instead of pain, I feel a strange sense of connection. For a moment, I can sense what it senses, see the world the way it sees it. The Aurora hunters don't see us as we see ourselves. To them, we're patterns of bioelectric energy, moving heat sources, generating electromagnetic fields through our nervous systems. We look like small, warm prey animals scurrying across a cold landscape, but some humans generate stronger fields than others. Scientists, engineers, people who work with electromagnetic equipment, people like me and Sarah. We collect the best hunters from each world, the lead hunter explains. Those who understand the hunt, who can track and observe and plan, we offer them a choice. What choice? Join us willingly and hunt between the stars. Resist and become prey for those who choose wisely. Sarah's screaming stops. Through the window, I see her standing perfectly still, surrounded by 3 Aurora hunters. Her eyes are glowing with the same green light as theirs. Sarah! I shout, but she doesn't respond. She's looking at me, but there's no recognition in her glowing eyes. She is learning, the lead hunter says. Soon she will understand her new nature. The hunters surrounding Sarah start to fade, becoming translucent again. But Sarah remains solid, still glowing with electromagnetic energy. As I watch, she walks through the station wall and joins the other hunters in the snow. Sarah, can you hear me? She turns toward me, and when she speaks, her voice has the same strange accent as the hunter's. The hunt calls, Daniel. Why do you resist what you were born to become? I realize with growing horror that she's not Sarah anymore. Something else is wearing her shape, speaking with her voice, using her knowledge of electromagnetic physics to lure me into trusting it. What did you do to her? We showed her the truth, the lead hunter replies, that she was always meant to hunt between the stars. Her bioelectric pattern is compatible with our energy matrix. She has become one of us willingly. The thing wearing Sarah's face steps closer. Join us, Daniel. You've spent your whole life studying the aurora. Now you can become part of what you've always admired. Around us, more aurora hunters are manifesting, taking solid form in the snow. Dozens of them, all glowing with green electromagnetic energy, all looking at me with those inhuman light-filled eyes. I back away, but there's nowhere to run. We're 300 miles from the nearest settlement, and even if I could reach a vehicle, where would I go? The aurora hunters travel through the magnetic field of the entire planet. There's nowhere on Earth they can't follow. The choice must be made before dawn, the lead hunter announces. Join the eternal hunt or become prey for your replacement. Above us, the aurora display is spreading across the entire sky. The electromagnetic energy is so intense that the snow around us starts to glow. My skin tingles with static electricity, and I can taste metal in the air. The thing wearing Sarah's appearance raises its hand, and suddenly I'm hit with visions of what my life could become. Flying through space along magnetic field lines, hunting on alien worlds, possessing knowledge and power beyond human understanding. I could explore the galaxy, discover civilizations beyond Earth's imagination, become part of something vast and ancient and magnificent. All I have to do is let go of my humanity. Think of your daughter, the Sarah thing says, and my blood turns cold. What about Emma? She has the same bioelectric potential as her father. In a few years, when her nervous system fully develops, she could join us as well. You could hunt together across the cosmos, father and daughter, for all eternity. The lead hunter nods approvingly. Bloodlines that produce strong electromagnetic signatures often breed true. Your offspring would make excellent hunters. I think about 12-year-old Emma, living with her mother in the lower 48, completely unaware that cosmic predators are planning to recruit her. The thought of these creatures taking my daughter, turning her into something like the thing wearing Sarah's face, makes me sick with rage. No, I say, leave her alone. The choice is not yours to make, the lead hunter replies. In time, all worthy humans will join us. Those who refuse will be eliminated to make room for better stock. The aurora hunters start moving closer, forming a tight circle around me. The electromagnetic field they generate is so strong that my nervous system starts to malfunction. My vision blurs, my hands shake, and I can feel my heart struggling to beat normally. Choose quickly, the Sarah thing says. Dawn comes, and with it, the end of your time for decision. I look up at the aurora display covering the entire sky, and suddenly I understand something the hunters don't expect me to understand. I'm not just an atmospheric physicist. I'm a ranger who's spent 13 years in the Arctic wilderness. I know this landscape, this weather, this environment better than any cosmic entity that's only been observing from the sky. And I know that in about 2 hours, we're going to have a solar storm. I've been tracking the solar activity reports for weeks. A massive coronal mass ejection left the sun 3 days ago, and it's due to hit Earth's magnetosphere right around dawn. When it does, it's going to overload the planet's magnetic field with more energy than these hunters have ever had to deal with. You're right, I tell the lead hunter. I've spent my whole life studying the aurora, and I know something you don't. The hunters pause, sensing deception but not understanding the source. You travel along magnetic field lines, I continue. You use Earth's magnetosphere like a highway system. But what happens when that highway gets hit by a solar storm? For the first time, I see uncertainty in the glowing eyes of the lead hunter. I pull out my last functioning piece of equipment, an old analog radio that's simple enough to resist electromagnetic interference. The solar storm reports are still broadcasting on emergency frequencies, and I tune it in so the hunters can hear. Massive coronal mass ejection expected to impact Earth's magnetosphere at approximately 0600 hours local time. All electronic equipment should be powered down. Electromagnetic interference may cause widespread communication and power grid failures. The hunters exchange glances, and I can feel their confidence wavering. They're used to controlled hunting conditions, stable magnetic fields they can navigate easily. A solar storm will flood the entire magnetosphere with chaotic energy patterns. You're trapped here until the storm passes, I explain. And when all that extra energy hits the magnetic field, you're going to get scattered across the entire planet. Maybe further. The Sarah thing hisses and raises its hand to strike me down, but the lead hunter stops it. Explain, it demands. Solar storms disrupt the magnetic field. Instead of smooth currents you can follow, you'll have electromagnetic chaos. Violent energy surges, random field reversals, magnetic substorms that could tear apart even your energy matrices. I can see the doubt spreading through the group of hunters. They're used to being apex predators, but they're about to face a force of nature that even they can't control. However, I continue, there is a way to ride out the storm safely. The lead hunter steps closer. Speak. You need an anchor, something to stabilize your energy patterns while the magnetic field goes chaotic. A local electromagnetic generator that can provide a steady field reference. I point toward the research station. My equipment includes a portable magnetometer with a calibrated field generator. It's designed to create a stable local magnetic field for instrument calibration. If you focus your energy through that device, you can maintain cohesion during the storm. And in return, you leave Earth. Find some other world to hunt. Don't come back. And don't recruit my daughter or anyone else from this planet. The hunters consider my proposal, but I can see the greed in their glowing eyes. They want both the safety I'm offering and the hunting grounds Earth represents. Or, the lead hunter says, we could simply take your device and kill you. You could try, but you don't understand how the equipment works. One wrong setting, and instead of providing stability, it will amplify the chaos. You'd be torn apart faster than the storm would do on its own. It's a bluff, but a good one. The hunters know I understand electromagnetic equipment better than they do. They've spent eternity hunting, but I've spent years actually building and calibrating the instruments they would need. Through the radio, we hear the first reports of the incoming solar storm. Aurora activity increasing across northern latitudes. Magnetic field fluctuations detected. Storm arrival imminent. The lead hunter makes a decision. Show us this device. I lead them toward the station, but I'm not planning to give them what they want. Instead, I'm planning to use what I know about electromagnetic physics to turn their own power against them. The magnetometer's field generator can indeed create a stable magnetic field, but it can also be overloaded to create a massive electromagnetic pulse. If I can trick the hunters into channeling their energy through the device at the moment of overload, the resulting feedback should disrupt their energy matrices completely. It will probably kill me too. The electromagnetic pulse will fry every electronic device within 50 miles, including the equipment keeping me alive in this Arctic climate. But it will also scatter the Aurora hunters so thoroughly that it will take them centuries to reform, if they ever can. Time to find out if I'm as smart as I think I am. I set up the magnetometer in the center of the station, adjusting the field generator to maximum output. The Aurora hunters gather around me, their combined electromagnetic presence making the air crackle with energy. When the solar storm hits, I explain, you'll need to channel all your energy through this focal point. The device will create a stable magnetic bubble that can protect you from the field disruptions. The lead hunter examines the equipment with senses I don't fully understand. This device generates electromagnetic fields, but its power source is insufficient for our needs. That's why you have to provide the power yourselves. The device just shapes and focuses the field you generate. Above us, the first aurora displays triggered by the incoming solar storm start flickering across the sky. The magnetic field is already beginning to fluctuate as the leading edge of the coronal mass ejection hits Earth's magnetosphere. It begins, the lead hunter announces. Take your positions. The aurora hunters form a circle around the force, magnetometer, their energy patterns linking together in a complex web of electromagnetic force. The thing wearing Sarah's face looks at me one last time. You could still join us, Daniel. The offer remains open. No thanks, I reply. I prefer to stay human. The solar storm hits with full force, and suddenly the sky explodes with light. Aurora displays unlike anything ever recorded flood the atmosphere with chaotic energy. The hunters start feeding their power into my device, trying to create the stable field I promised them. Instead, I flip the overload switch I installed while they were distracted. The magnetometer's field generator tries to process an energy load 1,000 times greater than it was designed to handle. For a moment, the electromagnetic field in the station becomes perfectly stable, exactly as I promised. The hunters relax, thinking they're safe. Then the device explodes. The electromagnetic pulse is like a nuclear weapon made of pure energy. It spreads out in all directions at light speed, disrupting every magnetic field within a 100-mile radius. The Aurora hunters, caught in the middle of the pulse, are torn apart and scattered across the chaos of the solar storm. Their screams are the sound of electronic equipment dying. The thing wearing Sarah's face tries to reach me as its energy matrix comes apart, but there's nothing left to reach with. The electromagnetic pulse disperses all the hunters back into random charged particles, exactly like the Aurora displays they once were. I'm thrown against the wall by the force of the explosion, and when I wake up 6 hours later, the station is dark and cold. Every piece of electronic equipment is dead. The radio is silent. The heaters have stopped working. But through the window, I can see normal Aurora displays dancing across the sky. Random, beautiful, completely natural interactions between solar particles and Earth's magnetic field. No intelligence, no hunting, formations, no glowing eyes. Just physics. It takes 3 days for the rescue plane to find me. By then, I'm nearly frozen to death, but alive. I tell them my equipment was destroyed by an electromagnetic pulse caused by the solar storm. It's even technically true. I never report what really happened. Who would believe it? Instead, I write up my findings as an unusual electromagnetic phenomenon caused by the interaction between solar storm activity and local magnetic anomalies. The military classifies it, which suits me fine. 6 months later, I transfer to a different position, somewhere warmer with less aurora activity. I want to stay as far away from the northern lights as possible, at least for a while. But sometimes, on clear winter nights, I look up at the sky and wonder if I really destroyed them all. The Aurora hunters were ancient, powerful, spread across the entire galaxy. Maybe I only stopped the ones that came to Earth. Maybe somewhere out there, on worlds I'll never see, the eternal hunt continues. And sometimes, when the aurora displays are particularly bright, I think I see shapes moving in the lights. Human figures, hunting formations, eyes made of electromagnetic energy. My daughter Emma is 15 now. She wants to study atmospheric physics, just like her father. She sends me pictures of the northern lights visible from her home in Minnesota, excited by their beauty and mystery. I always write back and tell her how proud I am. But I never tell her to be careful. I never explain why some lights are better watched from a distance. I never mention that the aurora might be watching her too. After all, bloodlines that produce strong electromagnetic signatures often breed true, and the hunt, I suspect, is far from over. My name is James Frostborn, and I've been a park ranger at Denali for 18 years. That might not sound like much, but when you're working in Alaska's backcountry, 18 years means something. It means you've seen every kind of weather this mountain can throw at you. It means you know the difference between a tourist who's lost and one who's about to die. And it means you've pulled enough bodies out of the ice to know that the cold doesn't care about your plans. I became a ranger after my wife died in an avalanche. Some folks thought I was crazy, coming back to the mountains that killed her. But Sarah would have understood. She always said the wilderness wasn't evil, just honest. It tells you exactly what it's going to do to you if you're not careful. It's people who lie. Before the mountains, I was an Iditarod musher. Made it to Nome 4 times, never won. But I learned how to read ice like other folks read books. I learned that dogs know things we don't, and that cold, has its own personality. In January, when the temperature hits 40 below and the sun barely shows its face, the cold becomes something alive, something that watches. The Wonder Lake District is my territory now. 20 miles north of the park road, it's nothing but frozen lakes and ancient moraines. During winter, it's one of the loneliest places on Earth. That's exactly how I like it. When you're alone out there, you can think. You can remember without having to explain yourself to anyone. January 1983 was different from the start. The cold came early and stayed mean. We were looking at baseline temperatures of 45 below, with wind chills that could drop to 70 below. The kind of cold that makes your breath freeze before it leaves your mouth. The kind that kills snowmobile engines and makes radios sound like they're underwater. I was getting ready for a routine supply run when the call came in. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, same name as my wife, which made my stomach twist, had been running ice core research near Wonder Lake. Her team was 3 days overdue for their scheduled radio check. 5 people, including a graduate student who probably had no business being out there in the first place. Probably just radio trouble, Chief Ranger Davies told me over the phone. You know how the equipment gets in this cold, but I knew better. In 18 years, I'd learned that when something feels wrong in the backcountry, it usually is. And this felt wrong in my bones. The morning I left for Wonder Lake, my dogs were acting strange. Rex, my lead dog, kept looking north toward the lake and whining. Dogs feel things we miss. They smell fear, hear sounds our ears can't catch. When a sled dog won't look at something, you pay attention. I loaded my snowmobile with enough supplies for 3 days. Emergency shelter, Arctic sleeping bag, medical kit, and enough food to keep 5 people alive if I found them. The radio was working fine when I tested it, crackling with static but clear. I had no way of knowing it would be the last normal conversation I'd have for a very long time. The ride out to Wonder Lake took 4 hours through snow that reflected the aurora like broken glass. Everything was too quiet. Even with the snowmobile engine running, the silence felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. I kept stopping to listen, thinking I heard voices in the wind. But there was no wind that day, just cold that made the snow squeak under my boots like styrofoam. When I reached the research site, I knew something was terribly wrong. The camp was there, but it was wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. The tents were standing, but they were covered in ice so thick you couldn't see through the fabric, not frost ice, like someone had poured water over everything and let it freeze solid. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the ice was on the inside of the tents too. I could see it through the mesh windows. Everything inside was frozen solid, like the cold had come from within the camp itself. I killed the engine and sat on my snowmobile for a long minute, listening to the silence. My thermometer read -52 degrees. Cold enough to kill, but not cold enough to freeze a tent solid from the inside out. Not in 10 minutes, not in 10 hours. That's when I saw the footprints. The footprints led away from the camp in a perfect straight line, like whoever made them knew exactly where they were going. They were human prints, made by boots, but they were wrong in small ways that added up to something impossible. First, they were too deep. I've tracked people in snow for 18 years, and I know how deep a print should be for someone's weight. These prints looked like they were made by someone carrying a 300-pound pack, but the stride was normal, not the careful shuffle you see when someone's overburdened. Second, they didn't fill in. Even in still air, snow settles into tracks. These prints looked fresh, like they'd been made minutes ago. But when I knelt down to examine them closer, the snow around them was frozen harder than concrete. My glove scraped against it like metal. Third, and this is the part that made my throat tight, the prints had no exit tracks from the camp. They just started at the edge of the frozen area, like someone had walked out of thin air. I followed them for about 50 yards before they reached the shore of Wonder Lake. The lake was frozen solid, had been for months. But where the tracks met the ice, there was open water. Not a hole, a perfect rectangle of black water, like someone had cut through 2 feet of ice with a laser. The footprints went into the water and didn't come back out. I stood at the edge of that impossible hole and felt something watching me. Not the way animals watch, alert and ready to run. This was patient, curious, like it was trying to decide something about me. My radio crackled to life. Base to Frostborn, come in. I grabbed for it like a lifeline. Frostborn here, I'm at the research site. What's your status? Find anything? I looked at the frozen camp, at the footprints that led into open water in the middle of January. The camp's here, but nobody's home. Equipment's frozen solid. I'm going to search the area. Copy that. Check in every 4 hours. Roger. I should have told them about the ice, about the footprints. But what was I going to say? That I found tracks leading into water that shouldn't exist? That tents were frozen from the inside out? Davies would have ordered me back to base for a psychological evaluation. Instead, I approached the closest tent. The ice covering it was perfectly clear, like glass. Through it, I could see sleeping bags, research equipment, personal belongings. Everything looked normal, except for being encased in solid ice. I drew my knife and tried to cut through the ice, on the tent door. The blade skittered across the surface like it was steel. I put my weight behind it and managed to chip off a few flakes, but it would have taken me hours to cut through. That's when I noticed my breath wasn't steaming anymore. In 50 below weather, your breath comes out like dragon smoke. It's one of the first things you learn about Arctic survival. You can judge the temperature by how fast your breath freezes. But standing there at the tent, my breath was coming out and disappearing instantly, like the air was so cold it was sucking the moisture right out of my lungs. I checked my thermometer again. The needle was pegged at the bottom of the scale, -65 degrees. But that was impossible. My thermometer was rated to work down to -70, and even then, the temperature was dropping as I watched. My snowmobile engine was still running, but it sounded wrong. Sluggish and rough, like the oil was turning to paste. I'd used Arctic-grade lubricants that were supposed to work down to -80, but the engine was dying anyway. I had maybe 10 minutes before it seized up completely. 10 minutes to get whatever information I could and get back to a safe distance before I was stranded on foot in conditions that would kill me in an hour. I circled the camp quickly, looking for any sign of the research team. What I found made my blood freeze colder than the air. Personal items were embedded in the ice formations around the camp. Dr. Mitchell's wedding ring was frozen inside a spiral of ice that twisted up from the ground like a frozen tornado. Someone's wristwatch was trapped in an ice formation that looked like reaching fingers. A graduate student's thesis notebook was sealed inside a block of ice so clear I could read the pages through it. These weren't things that had been dropped and frozen over. They were arranged, placed carefully in ice sculptures that had formed around them. Someone or something had taken these personal items and turned them into art. But there were no bodies. Anywhere. My snowmobile coughed and died. The sudden silence hit me like a physical blow. I was alone, on foot, in temperatures that were dropping past the point where human life was possible. The nearest help was 40 miles away, and my radio was already crackling with interference. That's when I heard the singing. It was faint, like wind through ice caves, but there was no wind. A wordless melody that seemed to come from the lake itself. Not human voices, but not quite animal either. Something in between that made my teeth ache. I turned toward the sound and saw them for the first time. 3 figures walking on the surface of Wonder Lake, silhouetted against the aurora. They moved wrong, too smooth, like they were gliding instead of walking. And they were coming toward shore. Toward me. I've seen a lot of things in 18 years of backcountry work. I've seen people do impossible things when they're dying of hypothermia, walk for miles with frozen feet, tear off their clothes in sub-zero weather, see things that aren't there. I told myself that's what I was looking at. 3 researchers, probably Dr. Mitchell's team, suffering from severe exposure and hypothermia. But even as I thought it, I knew it was a lie. The figures moved across the ice with perfect, synchronized steps. They left no footprints on the snow-covered lake surface. And they were tall, too tall, at least 8 feet each, with proportions that were almost human but stretched wrong, like someone had pulled them through a funhouse mirror. I reached for my radio, but all I got was static, mixed with something that sounded like whispering. The interference was getting worse the closer the figures came to shore. I backed away from the lake edge, moving toward higher ground where I'd left my emergency pack. My boots crunched through snow that was hardening under my feet with each step. The temperature was still dropping, and I could feel the cold starting to bite through my Arctic gear. The figures reached the shoreline and stepped onto land without breaking stride. That's when I saw them clearly for the first time. They looked human from a distance, but up close the details were wrong. Their skin was pale blue-white, like old ice, and seemed to glow faintly in the aurora light. Their hair was white and moved like it was underwater, flowing around faces that were beautiful and terrible at the same time. Their eyes were the worst part, completely white, like snow blindness. But they tracked my movements with perfect accuracy. They wore clothes that might have been human once, but were now made of ice and snow. Parkas that looked like they'd been carved from glaciers, boots that left frost patterns on everything they touched. When they moved, I could hear ice crystals falling from them like rain. The one in the center opened her mouth and spoke. Her voice was the sound of ice settling, of avalanches beginning, of winter storms building over empty mountains. James Frostborn. She knew my name. But more than that, she said it like she'd been expecting me, like this whole thing had been planned. "Where are the researchers?" I managed to ask. My voice sounded small and very human in the Arctic air. "They are preserved," she said. "They are safe from the warming world. They are with us now." She gestured toward the lake. And I saw them. 5 figures trapped beneath the clear ice, perfectly preserved like insects in amber. Dr. Mitchell, her graduate student, the rest of her team. Their faces were peaceful, almost happy, but their eyes were white now, just like the creatures standing in front of me. "They volunteered," another voice said. This one was deeper, male, and when I looked, I saw a figure I almost recognized. Tall, wearing clothes that looked like they'd been modern once upon a time. There was something familiar about his face, something that made my heart skip. "Who are you?" I whispered. "We are the Ice Walkers," the first one said. "We are the keepers of winter, the guardians of the frozen places. We preserve what must not be lost to the heat." The temperature around me dropped another 10 degrees. My emergency gear, rated for 80 below, was starting to fail. Ice was forming on the inside of my face mask, and my fingers were going numb despite my heated gloves. "The world grows warmer," the male figure said, stepping closer. "The ice retreats. The ancient cold places are dying. But we can save them. We can save everyone from the burning that is coming." He reached out with one hand, and where his fingers pointed, ice began growing from the ground toward my feet. Beautiful crystalline formations that caught and reflected the aurora light like jewelry. "Join us, James Frostborn. Your wife waits for you in the eternal cold." The ice reached my boots and began climbing up my legs. It didn't hurt, in fact. It felt warm against my skin, warmer than the air around me. Part of me wanted to just stand there and let it happen, to let the cold take me like it had taken Sarah, like it had taken the research team. But 18 years of ranger training kicked in. I broke backward, shattering the ice around my legs, and ran for my emergency shelter. Behind me, I could hear them following, and their footsteps sounded like icicles breaking. I dove into my emergency shelter and zipped it closed, knowing it wouldn't stop them but hoping it might buy me time to think. The shelter was designed for temperatures down to -70. But I could feel the cold seeping through the walls like they were tissue paper. My radio was completely dead now, filled with static that sounded almost like words. Words in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow understood. They were calling to me, telling me to come out, to stop fighting the cold, to accept the peace of preservation. Through the shelter walls, I could see lights moving outside. The aurora was getting brighter, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. And underneath that light, shadows were dancing. Too many shadows for 3 figures. More ice walkers were coming. I checked my supplies, food for 3 days, water for 2. A sleeping bag rated to -40, which wasn't going to help if the temperature kept dropping. Emergency medical kit. Flares, signal mirror. Nothing that would help against creatures made of living ice. That's when I found the notebook. It was tucked into my medical kit, wrapped in plastic. Not my notebook, Dr. Mitchell's. Somehow, one of her research journals had made it into my pack. The pages were filled with temperature readings, ice formation studies, and personal observations about the lake. But the last few entries were different. They talked about strange ice formations appearing overnight, about equipment malfunctioning in impossible ways, about voices in the wind. The final entry was dated 3 days ago. The ice is alive here. It grows in patterns that defy physics, forms structures that shouldn't be possible. The team is scared, but I think we're witnessing something incredible. The indigenous people's stories about ice spirits, what if they weren't folklore? What if they were observations? What if some things are too important to let die with global warming? I'm going to try to make contact tonight. Outside my shelter, the voices were getting louder. And they weren't just calling to me anymore. They were calling to something else, something bigger. The aurora began pulsing faster, and I could feel vibrations in the ground, like massive footsteps approaching from deep beneath the lake. The ground started shaking like an earthquake was building beneath Wonder Lake. But I knew it wasn't an earthquake, it was something moving under the ice, something huge that was answering the ice walker's call. I grabbed the emergency flares from my pack and crawled to the shelter entrance. If I was going to die out here, I was going to see what killed me. I unzipped the door and looked outside. The lake was glowing. The entire surface was lit from underneath with blue-white light, and cracks were spreading across the ice like a giant spider web. Through the cracks, I could see movement, massive shadows passing beneath the frozen surface. The 3 ice walkers stood at the shoreline, their arms raised toward the aurora. Around them, more figures were emerging from the ice itself. Dozens of them, all tall and beautiful and wrong. Some wore modern clothes frozen into ice sculptures. Others had clothing from decades past, maybe centuries past. They all had the same white eyes, the same pale skin that glowed like snow under moonlight. But it was the newest figure that made my heart stop. She stood apart from the others, wearing a red parka that I recognized because I'd bought it for her. Her blonde hair moved in that underwater way, and when she turned toward my shelter, I saw her face clearly for the first time in 8 years. Sarah, my wife, who died in an avalanche, who I'd buried in the cemetery outside Anchorage, who I still dreamed about every night. She walked toward my shelter with that smooth, gliding step, and when she spoke, her voice was winter wind through pine trees. "James, I've been waiting for you." I crawled out of the shelter, leaving my gear behind. Nothing mattered except the fact that Sarah was there, that somehow she was alive. The cold hit me like a physical blow, but I didn't care. I stumbled through the knee-deep snow toward her. "You're dead," I whispered. "I buried you." She smiled, and ice crystals fell from her lips. I was dying. The avalanche crushed my chest, broke my back. But the ice walkers found me before the cold could take me completely. They offered me a choice, death, or preservation. Eternity in the ice, working to save the frozen places from the warming world. She reached out and touched my face with fingers that were cold as metal. Where she touched me, frost began forming on my skin, but it felt good, like relief from pain I didn't know I was carrying. The world is burning, James. Every year, the ice retreats further. The glaciers are dying, the permafrost is melting, the Arctic is disappearing. We're the only ones trying to stop it. We preserve what we can, save who we can, keep the cold alive for future generations. Behind her, the lake ice was cracking apart with sounds like gunshots. Something massive was rising from the depths, a figure made of compressed ice and snow, tall as a building, with eyes like frozen stars. When it moved, the temperature dropped so fast my lungs seized up. "The Ancient One wakes," Sarah said. "The first ice walker, the one who guards the heart of winter. He's been sleeping beneath the lake for 1,000 years, but the warming world has forced him to act. He needs guardians, James. He needs people who understand what will be lost if the ice disappears forever." The Ancient One turned its massive head toward me and spoke in a voice like glaciers cracking. But somehow, I understood every word. "Choose, Ranger of the Mountains. Join us in the eternal cold. Help us preserve what must be saved. Or burn with the warming world when the ice is gone and the earth becomes a desert of heat and death." Around us, the ice walkers were forming a circle. I could see others trapped in the ice formations, not just Dr. Mitchell's team, but dozens of people from different time periods. Explorers, researchers, native hunters, all perfectly preserved, all with those white eyes that saw too much. "They weren't killed," Sarah said, reading my expression. "They were chosen. People who loved the wilderness, who understood that some things are worth preserving forever. The ice doesn't take everyone, only those who are worthy. Only those who truly care about what will be lost." She took my hand, and where our fingers touched, ice began forming. But it didn't hurt. It felt like coming home after 8 years of being lost. "I missed you," I whispered. "I know. I've been watching over you, trying to guide you here. The ranger station you were assigned to, the districts you patrolled, I influenced those decisions." The ice walkers needed someone who understood both the mountains and the cold. Someone who could be trusted with the greatest preservation mission in human history. The Ancient One moved closer, and with each step, the temperature dropped further. My gear was failing completely now. My boots were frozen solid, my gloves were useless ice blocks. In another few minutes, I would freeze to death whether I wanted to or not. "Choose now," the Ancient One commanded. "Join the eternal preservation, or die in the warming chaos that comes." I looked at Sarah, at the beauty and peace in her transformed face. I looked at the other ice walkers, all of them calm and purpose-driven, working together to save something precious from destruction. I thought about the research showing that the Arctic ice was shrinking every year, that the glaciers were retreating, that the permafrost was melting and releasing gases that would make the warming even worse. They weren't the monsters in this story. Climate change was the monster. Human greed and short-sightedness were the monsters. The ice walkers were just trying to save what they could before it was too late. But I also thought about the research team, trapped under the ice without being asked. I thought about all the other people who would be chosen if the ice walkers grew stronger. I thought about the world warm and chaotic and beautiful and human that would be lost if winter consumed everything. "I can't," I said, pulling my hand away from Sarah's. "I understand what you're trying to do, and maybe you're right about the warming. But people deserve a choice. They deserve to know what they're choosing between." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something sad flickered in her white eyes. "Then you choose death in a dying world." The Ancient One raised one massive hand, and the temperature around me dropped to absolute zero. The air itself began to solidify. My lungs filled with ice crystals when I tried to breathe. But then Sarah stepped between us. "Wait," she said to the Ancient One. "He's not choosing death. He's choosing to be a guardian in the warming world. Someone who protects the ice that remains, who guides people away from the places we need to preserve." She turned back to me, and for a moment her eyes flickered from white to blue, the same blue they'd been when she was alive. "Some of us can work from inside the ice, James. Others need to work from outside. Will you be our guardian in the warm world? Will you protect the places where we still exist?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. The Ancient One lowered his hand, and the temperature began to rise, but only to survivable levels. I was still colder than I'd ever been in my life. "Then take our mark," Sarah said. She reached out and touched my forehead with one finger. Pain shot through my skull like lightning. Ice formed under my skin, spreading through my nervous system like frost on a window. When it was over, I could sense cold in ways I never had before. I could feel the ice walker's presence like a compass pointing north. I could sense which areas of the park needed protection, which visitors posed a threat to the balance they maintained. "You'll live," Sarah said, "but you'll carry winter with you always. And when your time comes, we'll be waiting." The ice walkers began walking back toward the lake. The Ancient One sank beneath the surface without a ripple. One by one, the others followed, until only Sarah remained. "I love you," I called after her. "I know," she said. "That's why this will work." Then she was gone, dissolved into snow that blew away on a wind I couldn't feel. I made it back to the ranger station 3 days later, riding a snowmobile that started on the first try despite being frozen solid. The official report listed Dr. Mitchell's team as lost to an avalanche. The research site was declared off-limits due to unstable ice conditions. That was 15 years ago, and I'm still a ranger at Denali. But I'm different now. The ice mark Sarah left on me changed something fundamental. I can sense cold in ways that saved my life dozens of times, but I can also sense when the ice walkers are active. They're still out there. Not just at Wonder Lake, but in ice caves throughout Alaska, in the glaciers of Greenland, in the permafrost of Siberia, a network of preservation spirits working to save what they can of the frozen world. They choose carefully now, mostly researchers, who are dying in the cold anyway, explorers who understand the beauty of winter, native peoples who remember the old stories, but they also listen to me. When I mark an area as protected, they stay hidden. When I guide tour groups away from sensitive zones, they remain dormant. It's an uneasy partnership, but it works. The warming continues. Every year, I watch the glaciers retreat a little further, see the permafrost melt a little more, notice the wildlife patterns shifting as the climate changes. The ice walkers were right about that part. We are losing something precious and irreplaceable. Sometimes, in the deep winter nights, I hear Sarah's voice on the wind. She tells me about researchers who are getting too close to sacred areas, about expeditions that need to be redirected, about places where the ice is still strong enough to preserve what matters. And sometimes, when the aurora is bright and the temperature drops below -60, I see her walking across Wonder Lake, still beautiful, still determined, still working to save a world that most people don't even know is in danger. I never remarried. How could I? My wife is still out there, just beyond the edge of human understanding, fighting a war against entropy itself, and I'm still helping her, in my own small way. New rangers ask me sometimes about the areas that are marked off-limits, why we don't allow research in certain zones. I tell them it's for safety reasons, which is true enough. The ice spirits don't hurt people who respect their territory and follow the old rules, but they don't tolerate interference with their preservation work. The world is getting warmer, the scientists are right about that. But they don't know about the ice walkers, about the ancient guardians working to slow the melting, to preserve whatever they can of the eternal winter. Most people would call it impossible, supernatural nonsense. But I've seen impossible things become real when the temperature drops low enough and the aurora lights up the sky like the world is ending. So when you visit Alaska, when you venture into the backcountry in winter, remember this: respect the ice. Listen to the ranger warnings. Stay away from areas that feel wrong, even if you can't explain why. Because some things are more important than human understanding. And some guardians never stop watching over the places they were sworn to protect. The ice remembers everything, and it's still deciding what deserves to be preserved. My name is Catherine Graywater, and for 15 years I thought I knew everything there was to know about bears. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. I've spent most of my adult life in Alaska, studying the massive brown bears on Kodiak Island. At 39, I'd tagged over 300 individual bears, published 12 research papers, and consulted for National Geographic documentaries. The locals called me the Bear Lady, and I wore that title with pride. I lived alone in bear country for months at a time, armed with nothing but bear spray and the knowledge that these animals, while dangerous, were predictable. That predictability was what I loved most about my work. Bears followed patterns. They had territories, feeding schedules, mating seasons. Everything made sense when you understood their biology. I'd survived a bear attack as a child. That's what got me interested in studying them in the first place. I wanted to understand why that old sow had come after me that day near my family's cabin. Science gave me answers. Science made me feel safe. In September 1987, I was stationed at Remote Point Peninsula, 80 miles from Kodiak Town. It's one of the most isolated research stations in Alaska. You can only get there by float plane, and even then, only when the weather cooperates. The nearest help was a 2-day boat ride away. But I liked it that way. The fewer people around, the more natural the bear behavior I could observe. The peninsula is beautiful in a harsh way. Rocky coastlines stretch for miles, broken up by dense thickets of alder and streams full of salmon. Hidden valleys cut deep into the land, some containing caves that local Alutiiq people considered sacred. The weather in September was typical, overcast, cool, with frequent rain and fog rolling in from the ocean. Days were getting shorter fast, heading toward the long Alaska winter. I'd been at Remote Point for 3 weeks when the fishing guides started, calling in their reports. At first, I didn't pay much attention. Guides always had stories about unusual animal behavior. It made for good conversation with tourists. But these reports were different. They were consistent, and they were coming from guides I'd known for years. Serious men who didn't usually tell tall tales. "Bears acting strange, Catherine," said Tom Blackwood over the radio. Tom had been guiding fishing trips around Kodiak for 20 years. They're working together like I've never seen. Yesterday, I watched 6 adults coordinate to herd salmon into shallow water. Not just following each other, actually planning it out. Another guide, Sarah Chen, reported something even more disturbing. Found my equipment destroyed at camp yesterday. Not torn up like usual bear damage. Deliberately taken apart. Someone used rocks to smash my radio antenna. Placed the rocks in a perfect circle around where the antenna used to be. 3 separate incidents in 2 weeks, all from reliable sources. The State Wildlife Department asked me to investigate. Probably just learned behavior passing through the population, my supervisor said. Document it for the research files. I packed my gear, radio equipment, camera traps, tranquilizer rifle, emergency supplies, and headed deeper into the peninsula. The area where the incidents occurred was about 10 miles inland, in a valley system I'd only visited once before. Dense alder thickets made it difficult to navigate, and the constant fog made visibility poor. Perfect conditions for bears to move around without being seen. On my first day of observation, I set up a blind overlooking one of the main salmon streams. Within an hour, I saw something that made me question my own eyes. 7 adult bears were working the stream, but they weren't fishing randomly like bears usually do. They had positions. The largest male was stationed upstream, driving salmon toward the others. 2 females blocked escape routes on either side, while smaller bears waited downstream to catch anything that got through. It looked like a military operation. I watched for 6 straight hours, documenting everything on film. The bears maintained their positions with discipline I'd never seen in any wild animal. When one bear tired, another would smoothly take its place. They shared the catch equally, even though the large male could have dominated the others. That night, back at my base camp, I reviewed the footage by lantern light. On film, it looked even more impossible than it had in person. Bears just didn't behave this way. They were solitary animals during feeding, competitive and aggressive toward each other. What I'd recorded showed cooperation that seemed almost human. As I prepared for sleep, I heard them for the first time. Bear vocalizations from the valley. Not the usual grunts and huffs I was familiar with, but something more complex, almost like conversation. The sounds went on for hours, a back-and-forth pattern that reminded me uncomfortably of people talking in a language I couldn't understand. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me, bears making normal sounds that seemed strange because of the fog and the unfamiliar valley acoustics. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Something was very wrong at Remote Point. The next morning brought thick fog that didn't lift until noon. When it finally cleared, I found that all my camera traps had been disabled overnight. Not destroyed, disabled. Each camera had been carefully removed from its mounting and placed on the ground, face down. The memory cards were gone, but the cameras themselves were undamaged. Someone had known exactly how to operate the equipment. I spent the morning resetting the traps, this time placing them higher and in more concealed locations. The bears had to be learning from previous encounters with researchers, I told myself. Some populations developed wariness around human technology, but the precision of their actions bothered me. They hadn't just smashed everything like animals usually did. They'd specifically targeted the parts that recorded them. That afternoon, I hiked to a ridge overlooking the valley to get a better view of bear movement patterns. What I saw from up there made my hands shake as I adjusted my binoculars. Dozens of bears were gathered in a large clearing I'd never noticed before. Not just feeding together. Meeting. They sat in what looked like a circle, with the largest bears in the center and smaller ones around the outside. Every few minutes, one of the center bears would make vocalizations, and the others would respond. It looked like a council, like they were making decisions. I counted 43 individual bears. In 15 years of research, I'd never seen more than 8 bears together at one time, and that was only during the peak salmon runs at major fishing sites. This gathering was something else entirely. The bears weren't feeding, weren't fighting, weren't mating. They were just talking. I filmed for 2 hours until the gathering broke up. The bears dispersed in different directions, some heading toward streams, others disappearing into the alder thickets. But before leaving, every single one of them looked up at my position on the ridge. Even from half a mile away, I could feel their eyes on me. That night, I tried to radio headquarters to report my observations, but my equipment wasn't working properly. Static filled every frequency. though the radio had been fine that morning. I checked all the connections. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't get a clear signal out. Around midnight, I was woken by sounds outside my tent. Heavy breathing. Footsteps that were too measured, too deliberate, to be natural animal movement. I lay still, listening to something large moving in a circle around my campsite. The footsteps paused at my equipment cache, then at my food storage, then at the spot where I'd buried my waste earlier that day. Whatever was out there knew exactly where everything was located. I reached slowly for my flashlight, trying not to make any noise. The breathing sounds stopped immediately. Dead silence for several minutes. Then the footsteps resumed, moving away from camp. I waited another hour before getting up to look outside. In the mud around my tent, I found tracks that made my mouth go dry. Bare paw prints, but wrong somehow. The claw marks were too precise, too evenly spaced. And mixed in with them were other impressions that looked almost like human feet, if human feet were twice the normal size and had long toes. I took photographs of everything, then spent the rest of the night sitting up with my tranquilizer rifle across my knees. Nothing else happened, but I could feel something watching me from the darkness beyond my small circle of lantern light. Dawn brought no relief. My food cache had been opened during the night, but nothing was taken. Instead, items had been rearranged. My canned goods were stacked in a perfect pyramid. My trail mix had been sorted by type, nuts in one pile, dried fruit in another, chocolate pieces in a third. Someone had spent considerable time and effort organizing my supplies. Bears didn't do this. Bears tore into food containers, scattered contents, ate what they wanted, and left a mess. They didn't sort things into neat piles. I packed up camp and moved to a new location, deeper in the valley. If something was studying me, I wanted to make it harder. The new site was in a grove of large spruce trees that offered better cover and multiple escape routes. I set up my observation blind in a spot that gave me good sight lines in all directions. By afternoon, the bears had found me again. This time, they didn't hide. 3 massive adults emerged from the tree line and sat down about 50 yards from my position. They didn't threaten or charge. They just watched me. When I moved, they tracked my movement with their heads. When I raised my camera, they tilted their heads to get a better angle, as if posing. I took dozens of photos, trying to document their behavior. Through the camera lens, I noticed something that made my hands tremble. Their eyes were wrong. Bear eyes are dark brown or black, small and set deep in their skulls. These bears had eyes that were larger, more forward-facing, more intelligent, and they were looking directly into the camera lens, as if they understood what it was for. After an hour, the largest bear, a male that had to weigh over 1,000 pounds, stood up and walked slowly toward my blind. I raised the tranquilizer rifle, but he stopped just outside effective range and sat down again. Then he began to make sounds. Not growls or huffs. Words, syllables that sounded almost like human speech, but in no language I recognized. The other 2 bears responded, with their own vocalizations, creating what sounded unmistakably like conversation. I recorded everything, my finger shaking on the camera trigger. The bears talked for 20 minutes, occasionally glancing at me as if I were part of their discussion. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they stood up and walked away, disappearing into the forest with barely a sound. That evening, as I reviewed my recordings, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. The bears' vocalizations had patterns, repetitions and variations that suggested grammar, syntax, language structure. For the first time in 15 years of bear research, I was genuinely afraid. I should have left Remote Point that night. Every instinct I'd developed as a wilderness researcher was screaming at me to pack up and call for extraction. But I'm stubborn, and I needed to understand what I was seeing. Bears with language changed everything I thought I knew about animal intelligence. I decided to stay one more day to gather additional evidence. It was the worst decision of my life. The next morning, I woke to find symbols drawn in the mud around my tent. Not random scratches, deliberate markings that looked almost like writing. Curved lines and angular shapes arranged in patterns that suggested meaning. I photographed everything before the rain started and washed them away. My radio equipment was completely dead now, every frequency filled with static or an odd humming sound that hurt my ears. I was truly isolated, with no way to call for help if things went wrong. The smart thing would have been to hike back to my pickup point and wait for the scheduled resupply flight in 3 days. Instead, I decided to track the bears to their source. Following bear trails through dense alder is dangerous under the best circumstances. The thickets grow so thick you can barely see 10 feet in any direction, and bears can appear suddenly from any angle. But these trails were different. They were maintained. Branches had been broken back at precise heights, creating clear pathways through the undergrowth. Someone was managing these routes. After 2 hours of hiking, the trail opened into a valley I'd never seen on any map. It was perfectly circular, surrounded by steep ridges that would hide it from aerial observation. Ancient spruce trees grew around the edges, some of them massive, probably several hundred years old. In the center of the valley was a collection of caves set into a rocky hillside, and bears, dozens of them, moving in and out of the caves in organized groups. I found a concealed position on the valley rim and set up my camera with the longest lens I had. What I saw through that lens changed my understanding of reality. The bears were using tools. Not just simple ones like sticks to dig with, complex tools. They'd shaped rocks into specific forms for different purposes. Some bears carried what looked like hammers, others had sharp-edged stones that functioned like knives. They were butchering salmon with the precision of experienced fishermen, using techniques that took humans thousands of years to develop. But it was the social organization that really disturbed me. The bears had roles, hierarchies, task specialization. Young bears followed older ones in clear apprenticeship relationships. Groups worked together on projects, building structures from logs and stones, modifying cave entrances, creating storage areas for food. This wasn't animal behavior, this was civilization. I filmed for hours, documenting everything. Several times, bears looked directly at my position, but they didn't seem alarmed by my presence. If anything, they seemed to be performing for the camera, making sure I got clear shots of their activities. As afternoon faded to evening, the bears began to gather in the central area between the caves. More and more emerged from the forest until there were at least 100 individuals in the valley. They arranged themselves in concentric circles around a flat stone platform that looked like it had been deliberately constructed. Then the ceremony began. The largest bear, an enormous male with grizzled fur and scars across his face, climbed onto the platform. He began to vocalize in the same language-like patterns I'd heard before, but louder and more complex. Other bears responded in chorus, creating harmonies that sounded almost like singing. As the ceremony continued, something impossible happened. The big male's posture began to change. His movements became more upright, more human-like. In the dim evening light, it looked like his body was shifting, becoming less bear and more something else. I blinked hard and refocused my camera. Sure, I was seeing things wrong. But the impossible change continued. The bear was standing fully upright now, and his proportions were all wrong. Too tall, too narrow. In the growing darkness, he looked more like a man in a bear costume than an actual bear. Other bears began the same transformation, rising up on their hind legs and maintaining postures that should have been impossible for their anatomy. The entire gathering was changing, becoming something between human and animal. I was so focused on filming that I didn't notice the sound behind me until it was too late. Heavy breathing, right at my shoulder. I turned slowly and found myself face to face with another bear. This one was close enough to touch, close enough for me to see myself reflected in its two intelligent eyes. It didn't attack or threaten. It just watched me, as if curious about what I was doing. Then it spoke, "Catherine." My name, pronounced clearly in a voice that sounded almost human but came from a bear's throat. I was so shocked I dropped my camera. The bear tilted its head, studying my reaction. Catherine Graywater, marine biologist, bear researcher, 15 years studying us without understanding what we truly are. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Bears didn't talk. This was impossible. You were marked as a child, the bear continued. The attack that brought you to us wasn't random. You were chosen then, but you weren't ready. Now you are. Down in the valley, the ceremony had stopped. Every bear was looking up at my position, waiting. The creature beside me gestured with one massive paw toward the gathering below. Come down, Catherine. It's time you learned the truth about Remote Point. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't work. The rational part of my mind was screaming that this couldn't be happening, that I was hallucinating from isolation and stress. But the evidence was right in front of me, speaking my name. Everything I'd believed about the natural world had just collapsed. The bear that called itself my guide led me down into the valley through a path I hadn't noticed before. My legs felt like rubber, but somehow I kept walking. The other bears watched our approach with interest, but no hostility. Up close, I could see that many of them showed the same anatomical impossibilities I'd glimpsed during the ceremony. Proportions that shifted between bear and something else. My name is Tunrak, my guide said as we walked. His voice was getting more human with each word, though it still rumbled from a bear's throat. I was the one who marked you as a child. I've been watching your career ever since, waiting for you to develop the knowledge and skills we needed. This is impossible, I whispered. Bears can't talk. They can't. We are not bears, Tunrak interrupted. We are Alutiic ancestors, guardians of this sacred land. What you call bears are the forms we wear to move through your world unseen. We reached the central platform where the massive scarred male still waited. This close, I could see that his scars formed deliberate patterns, like ritual markings. His eyes held intelligence that was ancient and alien. This is Kakurtak, Tunrak said. He has protected these valleys for over 300 years. Kakurtak stepped down from the platform and approached me. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. Catherine Greywater, daughter of the marked bloodline. Your people have forgotten the old agreements. They seek to destroy what we have guarded since before their grandfathers were born. I don't understand, I said, though part of me was beginning to. Logging crews, Kakurtak continued. They will arrive in 2 days to clear-cut the sacred groves. Burial grounds of our people will be torn up for timber roads. Ceremonial sites will be destroyed for profit. The pieces clicked together in my mind. The recent bear behavior, the increased activity, the organized meetings, it was all preparation for a war. We cannot allow this desecration, Tunrak said. But direct action would expose us to your government's weapons. We need a human advocate, someone with scientific credibility who can stop the destruction through your legal systems. That's why you chose me, I realized. Not just to study bears, but to protect you. Your childhood marking gave you the ability to see us as we truly are, Kakurtak explained. Most humans cannot perceive our real forms. They see only animals, but you have always been different. Around us, the other bears were beginning their transformation again. In the darkness, I watched as dozens of massive forms shifted and changed, becoming something between animal and human. Their eyes glowed with an inner light that had nothing to do with reflection. The logging crews must be stopped, Kakurtak said. If they are not, we will stop them ourselves. But that would mean revealing our existence, and your government would respond with violence. Many would die, both our people and yours. I understood the choice they were giving me, become their advocate, use my scientific reputation to protect their sacred sites, or watch as an ancient people went to war with the modern world. What do you need me to do? I asked. Tunrak smiled, an expression that looked terrifying on a bear's face. Document our sacred sites as archaeologically significant. Your word carries weight with the preservation authorities. A simple report from you could delay the logging indefinitely. And if I refuse, Kakurtak's eyes flashed, then you will watch us reclaim these valleys by force. Machines will be destroyed, workers will disappear, your government will send soldiers, and blood will flow like the salmon streams. The threat was clear, but I sensed something else in their words. Fear. They didn't want war any more than I did. They were offering me a chance to prevent it. There's something else, Tunrak said. Your marking as a child created a bond between us. You can see us, hear us, understand us, but it also means you can never completely leave this world behind. You are part of our circle now, whether you accept it or not. I looked around at the dozens of transformed beings watching me, their eyes glowing in the darkness. Ancient spirits wearing the shapes of bears, guardians of a land that existed long before my people arrived. They were offering me a partnership, but it came with a price. If I help you, I said, what happens to my life, my career? Your research will become something greater, Kakurtak replied. You will become a bridge between our worlds, protecting not just this valley but sacred sites throughout Alaska. Our network extends far beyond Remote Point. I thought about the alternative: war between ancient spirits and modern machinery, bloodshed that could escalate beyond anything imaginable. My choice could prevent all of that. I'll need to see the sites, I said. Real archaeological evidence to support preservation claims. Tunrak nodded. We will show you. Burial grounds that predate European contact by thousands of years. Ceremonial stones with carvings your archaeologists have never documented. Evidence that will convince any preservation board. And the logging crews? They arrive in 36 hours, Kakurtak said. We need your report filed before then. I looked at my watch. It was already past midnight. Even if I hiked out immediately and caught the earliest possible flight, I'd barely have time to document the sites and file the necessary paperwork. There's a satellite phone at my main camp, I said. I can file the initial report tonight and follow up with documentation later. Then we have an agreement, Kakurtak said. He approached me slowly, extending one massive paw. When I reached out to shake it, his touch sent a shock through my entire body. Images flashed through my mind. Ancient ceremonies, the arrival of Russian fur traders, conflicts with modern development, decades of careful guardianship over sacred land. You are marked again, Tunrak said. Deeper this time. You will always be able to find us when we are needed. As the marking sensation faded, I realized that everything had changed. My life, my purpose, my understanding of the world, none of it would ever be the same. Go, Kakurtak said. File your report. Save our sacred places. And remember, this valley has many guardians throughout Alaska. You will meet them all in time. I turned and ran through the darkness, guided by the bare paths back to my camp. Behind me, I could hear the spirits beginning another ceremony, their voices rising in harmonies that sounded like grief and hope mixed together. I had work to do. I reached my satellite phone at 3 a.m. and spent the next 4 hours filing emergency preservation requests with every agency I could reach. Archaeological significance, potential native burial grounds, unique ecosystem requiring immediate protection. I used every argument in my hooded tooth arsenal. By dawn, Remote Point Peninsula was under temporary protection pending full archaeological survey. The logging crews were redirected to alternative sites. I'd bought time, but I knew this was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, I documented burial sites and ceremonial stones that dated back thousands of years. My reports triggered a full-scale archaeological investigation that eventually led to permanent protected status for the entire valley system. The Alutiiq Tribal Council, suddenly finding scientific support for their land claims, successfully petitioned for recognition of the area as a sacred cultural site. The logging companies never found out how close they came to disaster. My career took an unexpected turn after Remote Point. I became a specialist in indigenous cultural preservation, working with native communities throughout Alaska to protect sacred sites from development. The pay wasn't great, but the work felt meaningful in ways pure. Research never had. I never saw the bear spirits again in their true forms, but I knew they were watching. Sometimes, during my surveys of potential preservation sites, I'd find bear tracks arranged in patterns that looked like messages. Or I'd hear vocalizations in the distance that sounded like conversation. The network Kakurtak mentioned was real, and I was part of it now. 3 years later, I was investigating reported sacred sites near Denali when a park ranger named Mike Torres called me about unusual bear behavior in his district. Bears working together, using tools, showing intelligence that defied explanation. Dr. Graywater, he said during our phone conversation, I've read your papers on human-wildlife conflict resolution. These bears, they're different. It's like they're trying to communicate something. I booked a flight to Denali that afternoon. The work continues. Alaska is a vast state with thousands of sacred sites, and development pressure grows, stronger every year. Mining companies, oil drilling operations, logging crews, they all want pieces of land that have been protected by ancient guardians for centuries. But now they have a human advocate with scientific credentials and government connections. Someone who understands that some places are sacred for reasons beyond human comprehension, and that protection serves purposes both spiritual and practical. My childhood bear attack wasn't random violence. It was recruitment, a marking that would eventually lead me to become a bridge between two worlds, helping ancient spirits protect their heritage from modern destruction. I tell people I study bear behavior, which is technically true. I just don't mention that some of the bears talk back. Late at night, when I'm alone in the wilderness, I sometimes hear them singing. Voices that sound like wind through trees, like salmon streams over stones, like the earth itself protecting what it holds sacred. The songs remind me that I'm not alone in this work, that there are guardians watching over Alaska's wild places. Some of them just happen to look like the largest predators on the continent. The marking on my shoulder, the scars from that childhood attack, sometimes tingles when I'm near a sacred site that needs protection. It's like a compass pointing toward my next assignment, my next chance to prevent conflict between old ways and new greed. I've learned to trust that feeling. In 15 years of bear research, it's never led me wrong. And sometimes, on clear nights when the aurora dances across the sky, I swear I can see them moving through the forests, massive shapes that walk upright when they think no humans are watching, guardians carrying out their ancient duty to protect the land that shaped their spirits. They're still out there, and so am I. The work is far from over.